Story 1.
I thought my wife was cheating when I saw her with another man, but the truth left me shocked. I'm Ben, short for Benjamin Timothy Haggard. Shannon and I got married 7 years ago, but things haven't been going well lately. Despite my efforts, I can't shake the feeling of dissatisfaction with how our relationship has developed. This feeling has stuck with me for about 6 weeks, even before an unexpected photo appeared. The tension between Shannon and me has been increasing, especially in the last few days, and I suspect her sister, Nita, is somehow involved. After I received the photo, I found myself working outside the city on a more challenging project than usual. There was a critical issue with the main refrigeration unit at Purdue University, and despite our efforts, the team couldn't solve it. As an employee of the reputable Fraser HVAC company, I'm one of 2 highly qualified engineers responsible for solving such emergencies. Luckily, it was my turn to be on duty that week, so on Tuesday, I went on a 4-hour trip to West Lafayette and stayed there until Thursday. We finally solved the problem around 9 in the evening. Exhausted, I decided to have dinner at the nearest place on the university grounds, and by around 10 p.m., I went to my hotel room. I quickly sent Shannon a message saying I was going to bed and that we'd continue testing the system the next morning. I also mentioned we'd meet for dinner on Friday. After a refreshing shower, I got ready for bed with ESPN playing in the background. Unexpectedly, I received a message from Roland Bruton, my closest colleague at Fraser. The message included an apology and a photo taken that evening at Cassadell. Roland asked me to call him if I wanted to discuss this further. The attached photo showed a couple sitting at a table in a cozy restaurant, leaning against each other with intertwined hands and locked gazes. It was Shannon, my beloved wife, and standing next to her was Eric Chesterton, a colleague from the OSU library. I've never treated Eric warmly, considering him a bit strange, but the idea that he might be connected to my wife never crossed my mind. Recently, our relationship had been strained, and the thought of Shannon betraying me with another man was unimaginable. Realizing that doing nothing would only fuel my growing anger, I decided to turn off the TV and contact Roland. I conveyed my apologies for disturbing his Thursday night. Pausing to grasp the situation, I explained to Roland that it was time to discuss what he had seen. I shared that Emily and I had an early dinner, and as we finished, we noticed them on the other side of the restaurant. Emily had spotted Shannon and asked if it was her. I was intrigued, so I observed them for a while, taking pictures. Fortunately, they didn't engage in any affectionate gestures like kissing. They seemed deeply engrossed in conversation, mirroring the scene in the photograph. There was a hint of regret in Roland's voice as he exhaled loudly. He conveyed to me that he sincerely apologized. I inquired about their departure, asking if they left together and where they were headed. Reflecting on the incident, Roland continued by saying they waited in their car in the parking lot for a short while, but Shannon and the other man never appeared. Eventually, they decided to leave and sent me a photo. Roland expressed regret for leaving in a hurry without waiting for them, explaining that it seemed they had just received their drinks and hadn't started eating, suggesting a significant wait. A heavy silence followed, leaving both of us perplexed, unsure of what to say. Eventually, Roland spoke, expressing his understanding. He conveyed that he now understood the situation and went on to share, "I get it now, my friend. Emily wanted me to send you her warm regards. She's upset with Shannon, and I share her feelings. Though it hasn't fully hit me yet, I'm sure I'll be furious in a few hours." I inquired about the Purdue job, asking when I could come home. Roland provided the information, stating, "Yes, we plan to test it tomorrow morning, and after that I'll make a 4-hour trip back. It'll give me time to calm down and remind myself not to act impulsively." I responded with a smile. Deep down, Roland was aware that I wouldn't resort to violence against Shannon, and he understood that perfectly. Roland mentioned that he and his friend Emily had been discussing something, but it was probably too early to bring up. He offered, "If you ever need a place to stay overnight, we have a guest room just for you." I conveyed my gratitude, expressing, "Thank you, Roland. I really appreciate it. I don't know my next steps yet, but I'll definitely consider your offer." After a few more minutes of quiet conversation, I ended the chat. I turned off the light, lay down, and quickly fell asleep. After all, no marriage is perfect, right? Despite our flaws, I genuinely loved Shannon and did everything I could to make her happy for 7 years, including 3 years of dating. Of the 4 who married, we faced constant issues. From my observations, the main problems were money and closeness. Luckily, we didn't encounter problems in these areas. Neither of us was a wasteful spender, and our private connection remained as crucial to both of us as in the early months of our relationship. Though things became more routine, Shannon and I still desired each other equally. No, for us, the problem didn't relate to finances or closeness, but with Nita. She was 35, about 4 years older than Shannon and me. Her husband, Alex, wasn't any better. He was a vain lawyer who saw himself as superior, but at least I didn't have to endure his presence so often. Shannon always looked up to her older sister Nita, a frequent guest in our house who constantly gave unsolicited advice on how we should live. Shannon suggested that it would make more sense to store the dishes in one place and move the spices elsewhere. She commented on whether I still used a gas grill, stating that charcoal enhances the taste of meat much better. She also expressed her opinion on the hideous green chair, describing it as screaming trailer park. In general, that conveyed her overall perspective on the matter. It deeply bothered me that Shannon couldn't resist and ask her to leave. The most unpleasant part, sparing you the detailed list of Nita's other offenses, was that she consistently belittled me behind my back. If I was in the room, she'd be overly kind, endlessly praising me for being nice to Shannon, for being caring, for being so helpful around the house, while poor Alex, according to her, couldn't even change a light bulb. Overhearing her speak negatively about me more than once when she thought I wasn't around was infuriating. One day, while Shannon and she were having coffee in the kitchen, I quietly entered through the back door after a jog. She conveyed to Shannon that she adored her, but had to admit that I, Ben, could be a bit uncultured. She expressed that I didn't have the same charm as Christopher or even Tom, and despite my higher education, she questioned why I worked with my hands. In her opinion, Shannon could have chosen someone much better. I couldn't understand her thinking, especially considering we had been married for almost 2 years by then. It was frustrating to hear Nita reminiscing about Shannon's past boyfriends. She later asked if I was seriously thinking about having children with him, sounding upset. Just 5 minutes later, she appeared in front of me with a smile and mentioned that Shannon and she were just talking about what a wonderful husband she has. I couldn't believe it. Shannon and I had argued about this many times, and though she had calmed me down, she never took any action to solve the problem. She mentioned that Nita wasn't that bad and actually liked me, but I waved her words away. I expressed my emotions, exclaiming how I couldn't stand it when Nita said we were definitely not going to have children. Overwhelmed with emotions, I paced back and forth in the bedroom, consumed by anger. Disappointment overwhelmed me, and I feared I was on the verge of losing my mind. My wife tried to calm me down, explaining she was venting her discontent and loved me despite her tendency to incite quarrels. But this quarrel was one of the worst in our lives. I couldn't contain my emotions and ended up saying a few rude words, after which I ran out of the house. I was gone for 6 long hours, seeking solace with my friend Raphael, the bartender at Bob's restaurant. Mostly, I just sat there, trying to clear my head. When I got home at midnight, I found her sleeping in our bed, turning away from me. The atmosphere was tense, and our conversation was limited to a simple exchange of good morning wishes and a request for more coffee. Within a few days, the situation began to improve and become warmer, but it was never fully resolved. It was clear Shannon loved me, but I couldn't understand why she wouldn't take my side and ask her sister to stop humiliating me. The only way out for me was to avoid Nita as much as possible, making excuses so I wouldn't be home when she came. Besides, I tried to minimize conversations about her with Shannon. The weeks leading up to my trip to West Lafayette were particularly stressful. Oddly enough, Nita was present in the house more often than ever before. Almost every day, when I came home from work, she and Shannon had important conversations in the kitchen. Perhaps for this or another reason, Shannon began treating me colder and more distant. She realized it wasn't worth mentioning her sister in my presence, leaving me in the dark about what was going on with Nita. But apparently, Shannon still distanced herself from me. Although our communication remained polite, who needs simple politeness with his wife, she became cautious around me, and our closeness decreased noticeably. Recently, Shannon and I have been distant from each other for several weeks, exchanging only the usual hugs. Due to the strange atmosphere, it was challenging for me to approach her, and I was on the verge of giving up. Our private relationships also became routine, with only a few occurrences in the past month. Though not great at deep conversations, I did try once or twice. I asked Shannon if something was bothering her, if we needed to have a serious conversation. I wanted to solve our problems, but she said it was okay. She mentioned concerns about changes at work and minor issues with Nita, but nothing requiring special attention. I appreciate your concern, dear, a forced grin and a peck on the cheek. That's all I got in response. This behavior continued for quite a long time, and I decided to have a long conversation with Aunt Gwen. Aunt Gwen, my mother's younger sister, played a significant role in my upbringing after my father's passing and my mother's subsequent illness. Although she now lives in Seattle, we often talked on the phone. If anyone could help me understand Shannon's behavior, it was undoubtedly Gwen. When I returned from Purdue, I decided to call her over the weekend. After Roland sent the photo, I made a deliberate effort to set aside the confusion and focus on my work. On Friday morning, my main goal was to test the system's capabilities, ensure it handled the load, and quickly move on. By about 1 in the afternoon, we had successfully completed all necessary checks. As a thank you gesture, the Purdue team invited me to a quick lunch, and then I headed home. During the 200-mile journey, my mind was filled with numerous puzzling questions. Had they already been private, or was it just a possibility? Did my actions contribute to this situation? I also wondered if Shannon's feelings for him were genuine or just a passing fling. Could I find the strength to forgive what happened? Or was our relationship beyond repair, and did Nita play a role in this? Did she encourage her sister's actions? Maybe. Approaching Columbus in chaotic Friday traffic, I didn't have a clear answer, but I knew I wasn't ready to face her at home. After considering Roland's generous offer of his guest room, I ultimately chose a modest room at Motel 6, had a hearty steak and beer at Outback, and spent another night alone. With a sense of satisfaction, I sent Shannon the least affectionate message possible. I'm almost done, and I have to go home tomorrow. No sweet words or emojis, just the essential information for her to know I was alive. She replied, "Okay, honey, I miss you." Yes, that's correct. Around 9:30, I drove back to our street, slowly past our house, checking for unfamiliar cars nearby. Nothing seemed unusual. The house was dark except for our bedroom, where the curtains suggested the TV was on. Disappointed, I returned to Motel 6 and went to bed. When I returned to the house shortly before noon, there was no rush. I felt a wave of emptiness and indifference. If earlier I was consumed by anger and vindictive thoughts, now I longed for resolution. I needed to find out the truth, assess the consequences of this ordeal, and confront them face to face. Shannon's absence and the eerie silence in the house only intensified my emotions. Entering the house through a side door, I went upstairs to freshen up and organize my things. Then I went down to the kitchen to make a sandwich. My gaze involuntarily shifted to the front door. I stood paralyzed. A large suitcase stood untouched at the entrance. Approaching it, I felt its weight, indicating it was full. Time seemed to slip away, and I couldn't figure out how long I'd been fixated on it. The silence was broken by the sound of a side door opening. Shannon came in, greeting me softly, "Hello, baby," with an unusual half-smile. She hugged me warmly, more like a grandmother than a passionate embrace between spouses after a week apart. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I wasn't planning to raise my voice or create a scene, I just wanted to understand the situation. She led me back to the kitchen, holding my hand, and we sat at the table across from each other. Expressing concern, she mentioned that I must be tired and asked if I had eaten. She inquired if she could cook me lunch and asked what I wanted. I reassured her, saying I was fine, and focused on her face. Leaning closer, she conveyed seriously that she needed to talk to me. Expressing urgency, she apologized and watched me patiently, waiting for a response. But I remained silent. Eventually, she inquired if she could ask me something and requested that I remain calm and refrain from anger. She wanted to tell the whole story before hearing my thoughts and acknowledged that she was asking a lot. I nodded in agreement. All I wanted was for the situation to be resolved. She took a deep breath and began talking about Nita. To my surprise, anger suddenly surged within me. I expressed my frustration, asking, "What does this rude woman have to do with it?" Shannon pleaded, her face filled with panic, and she begged me to listen. I noticed that my fists were tightly clenched, and I was holding my breath. After rising from my seat, pacing around the kitchen and settling back down, I took a deep breath, attempting to compose myself. In due course, I responded, "Okay, go ahead. I promise to listen, so I will." I couldn't help but speculate on how the conversation might shift if she began discussing her sister. It hinted at the possibility of enduring a more extended discussion. After giving me a cautious glance, she began again, explaining that she had been spending a lot of time with Nita lately. She hoped I could understand how it was affecting her and creating tension. She mentioned that things had taken a turn for the worse between Alex and Nita, and she suspected him of betrayal. About a month ago, Nita found him with one of his assistants on the office table, and Shannon witnessed the unfolding scene. Feeling a strong sense of sympathy for Nita, it goes without saying that it was an incredibly tough time for her. Nita experienced deep heartache and anger, unsure how to handle the situation. Alex constantly apologized, expressed a desire to reconcile, and promised to do everything possible, including seeking counseling, to improve their relationship. But everything changed on Tuesday. Feeling depressed, Nita decided to take a break to calm down and then requested Alex to leave, expressing her desire for a divorce. Unfortunately, he resorted to physical force, leading to her hospitalization on Tuesday evening. She endured a concussion. In that moment, my own marital struggles briefly faded from my mind. I conveyed sympathy, stating, "I'm sorry, Shannon, I wouldn't wish that on anyone." She lowered herself, took my hand, and conveyed gratitude, remarking, "Thank you, dear. I understand that you don't like her, and that means a lot to me." Now comes the toughest part. She paused and explained that Nita would be discharged from the hospital on Monday but had nowhere to go. Alex is acting extremely difficult and refuses to leave the house. She wanted to offer her our guest room where she could stay. Most likely, she'd have to take sick leave and work part-time for a couple of weeks. She wanted to be close to her and take care of her. She hurriedly explained, "I know you don't like her and you don't want to be around her, but she has no one else to turn to. Please, Ben. Her life is falling apart and I am her only sister." "Ben, you're right, she's not the kind of person I particularly enjoy being around, but it doesn't matter now. Of course, she can stay with us." "Did you really think I would refuse?" She got up excitedly, circled the table and settled on my lap, wrapping her arms around me. When I looked into her eyes, pure joy radiated from her face. Expressing her gratitude, she whispered, "Thank you, my love." Her lips met mine in a gentle kiss, assuring me that everything would be fine. She vowed to protect me and ensure we saw each other less often. With utmost sincerity, she promised never to let her sister belittle me again, never again. The happiness emanating from her overwhelmed me, and I couldn't resist hugging her tighter. As I put my head on her shoulder, tears welled up for a moment, and I composed myself carefully. I moved her from my lap to a nearby chair. I went to the sink, poured a glass of water, and unable to endure the anticipation any longer, said, "Okay, Shannon, can we just finish this? Let's get this over with, whatever it is." She looked at me with confusion, and I couldn't help but express my disappointment. "Honestly, you can't even be honest with me. Dear, I sincerely don't understand what you're talking about." "What is the rest?" she asked. Disappointed, I picked up my phone, scrolled through the messages until I found the photo Roland had sent me, and shoved it in her face. "This, Shannon. You and this man," I said to her face. The revelation left her speechless. I was momentarily puzzled by the sight of her suitcase at the front door. How could she leave when she was helping her sister move in with us? Before I could finish, she said, "Oh, Ben, this is incredibly sad. Carrie, his wife, has a recurrence of breast cancer, and their 2-year-old twins are in the center of it all. He is absolutely terrified, and my heart is bursting with grief." I stared at her, suddenly grasping the importance of the photo where she was with a man. Yes, we had dinner. He really needed someone to talk to. Her prognosis is uncertain right now. She held my gaze for a moment, conveying a deeper meaning. "Did you genuinely believe it? Oh my God, did you think it was a romantic dinner? That's how it appears, right?" I couldn't even control the tone of my voice. "Roland and Emily Bruton certainly thought so. They are ready to meet you face to face." Before I could say anything or take any action, she hugged me tightly. "Benjamin Timothy Haggard, you are the only man I have loved or even considered in the last 7 years. Eric is just a friend whose wife is suffering from a terminal illness." I offered him emotional support when he needed it. It became harder and harder for me to breathe, not just because she refused to let me go. Additionally, I couldn't help but notice tension in our environment over the past few weeks. We lacked communication, physical closeness was scarce. I was consumed with worry about Nita, my love, and I couldn't trust you with this. The mere mention of her name disgusted you, so I carried this burden alone, which led to distance. I apologize for being so distant. My thoughts were exclusively focused on Nita and the vile actions committed against her. "Okay, I guess I can understand that," I said, but the suitcase caught my attention. It was standing fully packed at the front door. As I looked at it, she gently pulled my head down and kissed me on the lips with a long, sincere kiss, then met my tear-stained eyes. It was obvious that something had happened. I decided to go to Nita and Alex's house and gathered clothes so that she would have everything she needed for the coming weeks. "Baby, I'm very sorry about the misunderstanding that happened," she apologized, with regret in her voice. "I'm very sorry about this misunderstanding," I said regretfully. "You've had this photo since Thursday, and I can imagine how you suffered, my love. I'm very sorry." Without letting go of my hand, she gently pulled me towards the stairs. Her urgency left no room for delay. We had to solve something extremely important urgently. In the private atmosphere of the bedroom, we gently took off our clothes, hugged, exchanged tender kisses, and shed tears of love. We hugged each other tightly, fervently, and passionately, making tender love, completely immersed in the presence of my soulmate. While lying in bed, our hands explored each other's bodies as we engaged in intermittent conversations. I asked, "Really?" and she responded, "Yes, really, really." Her voice was filled with affectionate tenderness and playful teasing. She continued, "I really saw his wife. And did you really think that I was cheating on you?" Our friends Roland and Emily had the same thought. Although I despise the fact that his wife has cancer, it made me think about the state of my own marriage. I confessed, I thought it was over. She expressed her concern, saying, "I believe that one cheater in the family is more than enough. Poor Nita." As an epilogue to our conversation, it dawned on me. I'll be damned if it hasn't stopped completely, Nita. I must say she looked completely different, which is not so surprising considering what she had recently been through. At the same time, she expressed great gratitude for being in our house and constantly praised Shannon for marrying me. She apologized to me countless times, admitting that she had completely misjudged me. In the end, I insisted that everything was fine and that she could stop apologizing, but she still tried to help, even taking on some of the responsibilities of cooking and housework when she began to feel better. After she managed to find a fierce and determined lawyer, she finally got the opportunity to gain some financial stability and secure a nice apartment for herself during the chaotic divorce process. Despite the circumstances, she and Shannon continued to spend time together, but it was very nice to have the house at our disposal again. It was a calm and restorative period, almost reminiscent of a second honeymoon. We both acutely realized the value of our relationship and the depth of our affection. Watching a marriage break up and turn into a destructive mess served as a visual reminder to us that we need to cherish and appreciate our own marriage. There are noticeably more smiles at home. Only 4 months later, we received the joyful news about the recovery of Eric's wife. Despite the fact that Eric continues to be eccentric, I am sincerely happy for their positive outcome.
Story 2.
My husband jailed my affair partner and took away his retirement money after catching me cheating. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and for this discussion you can call me Gina. My husband Greg is 33 years old. We've been married for a decade and together for nearly 13 years. We have 2 children, a 9-year-old girl and an 8-year-old boy. Before my affair, Greg was the only man I had ever been with, whereas he had 3 previous girlfriends before dating me. Our marriage was wonderful, filled with love, laughter, and family. Even though we had been married for many years, our intimacy was incredibly satisfying for both of us. Now, here's where I messed everything up. I met a man, let's call him Rich, at my daughter's soccer practice. He was a parent of a 6-year-old girl who played in the league below my daughter's. Rich worked from home, which allowed him to attend soccer practices and games. Initially, I spoke to him as part of a group of parents while we watched our children on the sidelines. The reason he stood out was that he was one of the few dads who were there during practices, which typically happened right after school. Over time, we started talking more often, and I noticed that he would always come over and stand near me at every practice, even when I was with other moms. These conversations led to an uncomfortable discussion where he confessed he had strong feelings for me. I made it clear that I was happily married and that we needed to stop talking. He respected my decision and backed off. Strangely, even though I rejected his advance, I found myself enjoying the attention. I know it was terribly wrong, but I want to be honest and share what I was feeling. Eventually, he brought up his feelings again and asked if I would meet him for coffee at a cafe in the neighboring town. Initially, I refused, but later I decided to meet him, with the understanding that it would be a one-time coffee meeting and nothing more. Looking back, I realized that just talking to him was a form of cheating and a complete disrespect to my husband and family, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. At the end of our private meeting, just before we left for our children's practice, he suggested that I come to his house the following day. At the same time, he handed me a piece of paper with his home address. I initially declined, but he gently kissed me, and I'm ashamed to admit that not only did I kiss him back, but I kissed him again when he pulled away. The next day, we met at his house and engaged in an affair. There was no conversation or build-up, we just went ahead with it. As I looked around and saw photos of his beautiful wife and child, I became deeply upset with myself. Thoughts of Greg and my kids overwhelmed me, and I burst into tears, telling Rich that I couldn't continue this. We cleaned up, got dressed, and left in our separate cars for our children's practice. During the following week, I made an effort to avoid Rich at soccer practice. When I finally did speak to him again, I firmly told him that I wanted no further contact with him. In response, he handed me a note containing the name and address of a hotel in the same neighboring town. He mentioned that he wanted me to meet him there the next day at our usual time, but understood if I chose not to. I simply said, "No, I can't," and left. That night, I stayed awake, contemplating how this situation could destroy my marriage and family if it ever came to light. However, I foolishly believed the risk was low, since we never communicated through calls or texts. All our interactions were verbal or through handwritten notes. I had no intention of going, but I eventually gave in and met him. Similar to our first encounter, it ended with me in tears telling Rich that we couldn't continue this. This time, he agreed, but he believed our intimate moments were worth the risk. We parted ways and remained apart for a whole month, with no contact except for brief conversations during soccer practice and games when talking to other parents. What's most troubling is that during one of the games, my husband Greg and Rich ended up chatting for over 20 minutes. It made me feel terrible, but in a twisted way, it also excited me for some reason. Fast forward to my D-Day, the day my husband discovered my affair, the absolute worst day of my life. Already crying, Rich and I had a conversation at soccer practice the day before and came to an agreement that we shouldn't meet anymore. We were both happily married and loved our spouses and children. However, here's where I made a really terrible mistake. We decided to meet one final time. I know some people here might find it hard to believe, but it's the truth. D-Day was supposed to be our last meeting. I didn't want to meet at Rich's house because I couldn't bear to see the photos of his wife and child, so I suggested that he come to my home instead. The plan was for him to park on the nearby street, walk over to my house, and enter through the side door, where I would let him in. Since it was lightly raining and there was no one on the street, I thought he did so without anyone noticing. I took him to our home office on the second floor, which has a guest bed, and that's where we met. I want to emphasize that I would never have done anything in our marital bed like we did at Rich's house, because I have too. Much love and respect for my husband. Since this was going to be our final encounter, there was a lot of kissing and foreplay before the actual intimate act. I'm not sure what came over Rich, but he suddenly panicked and attempted to rush past Greg, who was blocking the door. Greg is quite tall, standing at over 6 feet and weighing nearly 230 lbs, whereas Rich is around 5 feet 10 inches and weighs only about 160 lbs. As a result, Rich bounced off Greg and fell backward to the floor. Undeterred, he got back up and tried to charge at Greg, but this time Greg took a step forward and forcefully pushed him back. The force of the push sent Rich flying backward, causing him to collide with one of the window screens and fall out of the window, landing on a large bush in front of our house. It was shocking because he was completely unclothed. I was in tears and pleaded with Greg to stop, fearing that he would harm Rich, and I didn't want Greg to face legal trouble. In response, Greg gave me a hostile look and hastily went downstairs. I was concerned he might physically harm Rich and was anxious about my husband's legal situation. I watched from the window in a blanket and saw Rich still lying unclothed in the bush, trying to free himself. I could see that he had scratches and was bleeding, although it didn't seem to be a serious injury. Greg emerged from the house holding Rich's cell phone and began shouting at Rich, demanding his passcode. Rich began begging for mercy, pleading with Greg not to hurt him and not to call his wife, Kate. Greg became angry and threatened Rich, saying, "Give me the damn code or there will be consequences." In response, Rich quickly provided the code and Greg entered it into the phone. Greg then made a call to Kate, introducing himself and explaining the situation. He told her he was standing there with her husband, who he had just caught in an intimate act with his wife. After some more discussion and reassurance, he provided Kate with our address and ended the call. I noticed our next-door neighbor coming over. He asked Greg if everything was okay. Greg replied that it wasn't, but he'd manage. Greg thanked him for alerting him to the situation and explained that he had caught us in the act. Our neighbor mentioned that he suspected something was amiss when he saw a man lurking around outside our house. Initially, he thought it might be a burglary until he saw me answering the door and letting the man in. The neighbor felt compelled to call Greg. Greg informed the neighbor that he intended to contact the police to report the incident. Upon hearing this, Rich began to cry and begged Greg not to involve the police. At that point, Rich was still unclothed and trembling. I called down to Greg, pleading with him not to call the police, but he paid no attention and made the call. The police arrived within a few minutes. Greg and our neighbor met the officer at the curb and had a discussion for several minutes, gesturing toward the neighbor's house and then up to our office window. They then proceeded to the bush where Rich was huddled over, crying and still unclothed. The officer asked Greg if he could retrieve Rich's clothes, and Greg agreed to do so. When I heard Greg open the door, I rushed to the top of the stairs, crying and expressing how sorry I was and how much I loved him. However, he didn't look up. He simply gathered Rich's clothes and shoes from the floor and stairs and returned outside. The officer took the clothing from Greg and handed them to Rich, who clumsily got dressed. Rich was hyperventilating and still shaking intensely. At this point, I had never witnessed someone in such a state, and I realized it was likely due to a combination of nervous fear, shock, and the cold, as it was around 55 degrees outside. I stood by the window while the officer questioned Rich, but they couldn't see me due to the window screens we have. The officer instructed Rich to calm down and relax, which he eventually managed to do. Rich took responsibility for what happened, admitting it was all his fault. He provided an honest account of the situation, explaining that he charged at Greg because he just wanted to get away from there. The officer asked whether Greg's action of pushing him was defensive or offensive, to which Rich responded that it was defensive. I felt relieved that Rich didn't falsely accuse Greg. Before long, a group of neighbors had gathered in front of our house. The neighbor who had alerted Greg was explaining the situation to them. I was deeply embarrassed and couldn't help but cry even harder. Returning to the police officer and Rich, the officer inquired if Rich wanted to press charges, but Rich declined, expressing his desire to leave and promising never to disturb our family again. Shortly after, Rich's wife, Kate, arrived in front of our house. My husband went out to meet her, and they had a brief conversation. Rich rushed over to her, crying and apologizing, but she didn't acknowledge him. The officer spoke to Kate, and I could faintly hear her saying that she wanted Rich to stay away from her. The officer then instructed Rich to step back, which he did, and he started sobbing uncontrollably. The officer had a conversation with Greg and Kate for a few minutes before entering the house to talk to me. He called up the stairs and asked if I could come down and have a conversation with him. I agreed, but requested a minute to get dressed. The officer then took my statement, and towards the end of our conversation, he mentioned that my husband had requested that I voluntarily leave the home. I told the officer that I didn't want to leave and that I needed to discuss this with my husband. The officer understood my feelings but explained that it might be best if I left, at least for the night, to allow things to settle down. I broke into tears, and the officer asked if there was someone I could call. I told him yes, my parents. Almost immediately, I heard my mom on the porch talking to Greg. When I saw her expression, I simply said, "Mom, I'm sorry, I messed up really badly." The officer then explained to my mom that it would be advisable for me to stay with her for a few days until things calmed down. I went upstairs with my mom to pack my things. She didn't say anything while I packed, but I could tell she was upset, embarrassed, and deeply disappointed in me. Once my mom and I came downstairs and went outside, only the officer was there, along with several neighbors who were still on the sidewalk talking. The officer informed us that Greg had gone to pick up the kids from school and would be taking them to practice, followed by dinner. He mentioned that Greg had requested that I close and lock the door, and that Greg would get in touch with me in a few days to talk. Upon returning to my parents' house, both Mom and Dad reprimanded me for ruining my marriage. I simply apologized and expressed my determination to regain Greg's trust. My dad, however, told me that it was unlikely to happen and that I should start preparing for a divorce. This news brought me to tears, and Mom asked him why he would say such a thing. He responded bluntly, "Because it's true." Over the next 2 days, I sent texts and called Greg repeatedly, but he didn't respond. Then, on Wednesday evening, he sent a text suggesting that we meet on Saturday morning at our house to discuss our next steps. In that same text, he mentioned that he had already talked to our kids about what happened, and I couldn't believe he had done this without me. I feared that our kids might now despise me. In another text message, Greg informed me that he had pressed charges against Rich and obtained a 30-day restraining order, TRO. I disliked hearing this news because I just wanted this nightmare to be over. To make matters worse, the incident had been reported in the police section of our local newspaper. Although it didn't mention names or our house number, it did reveal our street name and made it clear what had occurred. Saturday arrived, and I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness about seeing Greg again. My dad and Mom drove me to our house and stayed on the porch as Greg and I met inside. I told them they could leave, but Greg insisted on them staying as he didn't trust being alone with me. Sigh. When I approached him for a hug, he held up his hands to keep me at a distance. We sat down and he handed me separation papers. I broke down in tears and pleaded with him, saying, "No, please don't do this." I continued to beg and express how deeply sorry I was and that I loved him, only him. However, he responded with a firm no and began explaining the contents of the separation papers. Despite my continued pleas, he kept on explaining the details of how the separation would work. He mentioned that I could move back into the house, but I would be staying in the office, which would remain as it was when I left. He then talked about splitting our bank accounts evenly and dividing the equity in the house in case it was ever sold. However, he emphasized that he wanted me to waive any claim to his 401k retirement account. He went on to explain that starting the following month, I would be responsible for contributing 35% of our living expenses, which included the mortgage, insurance, utilities, car payments, groceries, and so on. Given that I didn't have a job, I would need to pay him this amount for my share of the savings. He made it clear that all of these terms were spelled out in the separation agreement and advised me to consult with a lawyer to review it. I expressed my reluctance to involve a lawyer and reiterated my desire to talk to him about our relationship. But he calmly but firmly stated that there was nothing left to discuss and that he just wanted to officially separate from me. He also clarified that he would only communicate with me regarding matters related to our children or when our children were present during the conversation. Anything else I said would be disregarded. With tears in my eyes, I asked if he planned to divorce me, to which he replied, "Right now, that's my plan." I told him I couldn't imagine living without him and that I was willing to fight with all my strength to keep our relationship intact. He simply stared at me with disgust and burst into loud laughter. Following that, he called my parents into the room and put his parents on speakerphone, explaining everything he had just told me to both sets of parents. It felt like a business meeting, but for me, it was sheer torment. All I could do was apologize to Greg. This all unfolded earlier today, and now I find myself here in the office, writing this post at 1:44 a.m. because I can't sleep. When I talked to my sister earlier, she gave me some valuable advice and suggested I post here to see if any readers might offer additional suggestions that could be helpful. So here I am, seeking guidance. What should I do? Have I irreparably damaged my marriage? Is there any hope of reclaiming the beautiful life I destroyed, or is it lost forever? I welcome all responses, even the critical ones. Right now, I feel like an outcast with no one to turn to. My sister has been supportive, although she too is disgusted with my actions. Thank you in advance for taking the time to read this and for any replies you may offer. A lot has transpired in my life since my last update. Firstly, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who responded to my original post. Reading all the responses provided me with some solace, even though many of them were highly critical of my behavior. From my own experience, I can attest that not every story has a happy ending. In fact, some endings are truly heartbreaking. Greg and I are now officially divorced, and just typing those words brings tears to my eyes. I still can't fully grasp the reality of it all. It feels like a never-ending nightmare. If you recall from my initial post, my husband and I were living together in our home despite being legally separated. In the beginning, things were distant and cold between us, but over the first month, Greg gradually started warming up. He began talking to me more, even sharing laughter and jokes with me and the kids. I felt optimistic about our progress and believed that if we continued on this path, we could reconcile. Then, unexpectedly, 4 months into our separation, Greg expressed the desire to have a private conversation with me without the kids. I thought it might be a discussion about taking the next steps towards reconciliation, but to my shock, he told me he wanted a divorce. I was utterly devastated. I know the term devastated is used frequently in these posts, but I can assure you that I truly felt that way. Greg clarified that while he would always have deep care for me as the mother of our 2 beautiful children, the love, passion, and trust he once had for me had vanished. I did everything I could to change his mind, but his decision was final. We hugged, but it didn't feel like the embrace of a husband and wife. It was more like 2 friends. Since we had been separated for nearly 4 months and had already agreed on the division of assets and custody in our separation agreement, the divorce process proceeded swiftly and was finalized in February of this year. Greg treated me fairly. He bought out my equity share in our home and even gave me an additional $10,000 to ensure I could provide a stable home for our kids. Despite having a decent sum of money from the divorce, it wasn't enough to buy a home or sustain me for the rest of my life. So I ended up taking a job at a new donut franchise conveniently located down the street from our kids' school. I knew the woman who owned the franchise, so I reached out to her about a job, and she hired me on the spot. Despite what you might assume, I genuinely enjoy working there. The owner is incredibly kind and understanding, my colleagues are fantastic, and our customers are extremely friendly. Sometimes I wish I had taken this job while I was married. Perhaps things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. You know the saying, an idle mind is the devil's playground, or something like that. Well, I can't change the past. Contrary to what you might think, I love working there. The owner is very nice and understanding. My coworkers are awesome, and our customers are super friendly. I kind of wished I had gotten a job while I was married, as maybe things wouldn't have turned out like they have. How does the saying go? An idle mind is the devil's playground, or something like that. Oh well, I can't change the past. It's clear that Greg and Kate were involved with each other during our separation. Rumor has it they began their relationship shortly after D-Day, but since we live in a no-fault state, it doesn't really matter. Unlike Greg and me, Kate decided to divorce Rich promptly. Their divorce was finalized months before ours, mainly because the house they lived in was a gift to her, and they didn't have much in savings. As for Rich, it's a tragic story. He was deeply affected by the divorce, and on Halloween of last year, he got arrested for a DUI. Apparently, it was his second offense. Kate used this to gain full custody of their daughter, and now Rich only has supervised visitation, which takes place at Kate's parents' house because Greg and Kate don't want to see him, and Rich is afraid of Greg. I heard all of this through gossip. I find it both unfair and unkind for Kate to take these actions against her child's father, even though she may have strong negative feelings towards him. However, I understand her motivations behind what she did. Kate and her daughter are currently residing with Greg and my children in what used to be my house. Although it's no longer technically my house, I still think of it that way. This whole situation is really disheartening, and I try my best not to dwell on it, though it's a constant presence in my mind. I attempt to convince myself that what's happening with Kate is just a passing phase for Greg, much like the phase I went through with Rich. Kate is young and attractive, she's 26, so she's like a new distraction for Greg. Given the stressful circumstances that brought them together, I doubt their love is genuine. Nonetheless, I still hold on to the hope that Greg and I will eventually reunite. In the meantime, I genuinely wish him and Kate all the best. Recently, I received news that my contact with Greg will be further limited. He informed me that we will only communicate about our kids via email starting this Wednesday. Greg mentioned that Kate has been communicating with Rich in the same manner, and he wants to do the same. Hearing this was another blow for me. I believe Kate must have influenced this decision, as Greg wouldn't cut me off like this on his own. As for myself, I've been dedicating most of my time to decorating my new apartment and making it a comfortable space for my kids. It only has 2 bedrooms, so things are a bit tight, but we're managing. I wish I could go back and change the past, but that's not possible, so I'm focused on moving forward, one small step at a time. This is where I currently stand. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Alright, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. I met my wife when I was 16 years old, but we tied the knot when we were both 21, and we welcomed our daughter at 22. Now we're both 47. The day I discovered her infidelity was rather unusual. I woke up that morning feeling unwell. I nearly considered calling in sick to work, but instead, I went in, although I ended up leaving early. In hindsight, I'm grateful I left work early that day. My wife also had a job. I can't help but wonder if it was something I ate the night before or some random illness. By the way, she was an excellent cook, probably the only thing she excelled at now that I think about it. One significant warning sign that I completely overlooked was her best friend Kay, who happened to be single and frequently changed partners. She would share her escapades with my wife, and yet my wife would assert that she could never live that kind of lifestyle and express her happiness in marriage and family life. Ironically, Kay, her best friend, had even been involved with my wife's college boyfriend, but this was her closest friend. The company you keep says a lot about you. It wasn't until I discovered her cheating that I truly understood who my wife was. So that morning, feeling unwell, I headed to work. After having some coffee, I felt a bit better, but the waves of nausea persisted. I clocked out at lunchtime, and before heading home, I stopped to get some medication, hoping it would help me sleep off this ailment. My wife was supposed to be at work as well. She had prepared for her workday that morning, and I typically left for work before her. However, she was getting ready as though she was heading to the office. As I pulled into our building, it's worth noting that we were renting a townhome that shared a wall with another unit. I had to maneuver around to reach the parking lot, and I noticed my wife's car parked there, along with another car in the neighbor's spot. I thought maybe he had a visitor, but then I wondered why his car was missing, and why was my wife's car here. Finding no parking space, I decided to pull out and park on the street in front of our building. As I approached the door, I heard incredibly loud music blasting. Initially, I thought it might be the neighbors, but I soon realized it was coming from our unit. From the front of the unit, I could see our bedroom window, and the music was definitely emanating from there. Upon entering, my suspicions were confirmed. Music was playing inside our place. Hastily, I climbed the stairs, opened the bedroom door, and there it was. My wife was engaging in physical activity with a guy who I later discovered was her boss, while her best friend was hugging the man over the music. I shouted, "What the hell?" My wife swiftly dismounted the guy, her boss, and implored me to calm down, addressing me as, "Honey, please stop." Enraged, I shoved my wife aside and proceeded to physically confront the guy. Her best friend joined in the altercation, landing a solid punch to my nose. Although it wasn't broken, I needed medical attention to set it straight. Attempting to sue her and her boss for their involvement with my wife is another complicated story, far from the simplicity of internet advice. My wife and her best friend started brawling amongst themselves, creating an utterly chaotic scene. When I look back on it now, I still can't believe the absurdity of the situation. I turned off the music and ordered the guy to get out of my house, which he did hastily, even fleeing partially unclothed. However, when I went to another room to check out the window, he had managed to put his pants on and was rushing to his car downstairs. Returning to the room where my wife and her friend were arguing, her friend urged my wife to come clean and tell me the truth before she did. My wife remained silent, gazing at her friend. Eventually, her friend revealed that this was their lifestyle, and my wife had joined her in this business 3 years ago when I lost my job. I was laid off, while my wife retained her job. During that period, I was receiving unemployment benefits, but losing that significant portion of our income made things quite challenging for us. She mentioned that my wife approached her for financial help, and she suggested my wife could join her in her line of work. I inquired about the nature of this profession, but she implied I already knew. I insisted that I didn't and had never really paid attention, only recognizing that she was often with different guys whenever I saw her. She clarified that men paid her for her services, primarily for dates and conversations. I interrupted asking, "So you're an S worker?" She just stared at me. I turned to look at my wife, but she kept her head down. Subsequently, I left the house and drove over to a nearby family's home, where I divulged everything. Divorce plans, STD, STI testing, and paternity testing for my daughter was the only option. With the support of a close family member, I was able to find a divorce attorney. He assisted with the initial expenses, although I later repaid him despite his assurance that I needn't worry about it. After visiting my doctor for a checkup, I received a clean bill of health, and the paternity test confirmed my beautiful daughter was indeed mine. I attempted to pursue a lawsuit for alienation of affection, a concept I wasn't even aware of until my lawyer mentioned it. Her boss contested the claims, asserting that he was not responsible for our marital troubles. My wife sided with him, asserting that our marriage had been deteriorating long before her involvement with him. To cut a long story short, the lawsuit was dropped, and I was unable to sue him. Given our financial constraints and my primary focus on obtaining a divorce, that became my main priority. Consequently, both my ex-wife and her boss were terminated from their jobs. I suspect that my ex-wife may have continued working as an S worker, but it seems unlikely that anyone would want her services now. It appears she may want her husband back. At this point, our daughter's wedding isn't the first occasion when she expressed her longing for me. On a previous occasion, we were all gathered with my daughter making some plans when my ex-wife suddenly mentioned, "Oh my gosh, I remember our honeymoon." We stayed at a hotel near a concert, and it was so much fun. I deliberately avoided acknowledging her statement, hoping to steer clear of that topic, but she went on saying, "We used to be so happy, but I had to go and ruin everything." I continued ignoring her, and soon enough, tears welled up in her eyes. My daughter was just observing her mother and asked what was bothering her. My ex-wife confessed that she had ruined her own life and felt like she had nothing. She expressed how she was trying to communicate, but felt like no one was listening to her. She pleaded with my daughter to promise that she would do whatever it takes to keep her own family together and not repeat her mistakes. I struggled to suppress my laughter, but I couldn't hold it in entirely, and both my daughter and ex-wife turned to look at me. I quickly excused myself to the restroom, where I couldn't help but burst into laughter. I couldn't believe this woman. I even poked fun at myself while looking in the mirror. After composing myself, I returned to the main room and we resumed our planning. On the day of my daughter's wedding, my ex-wife told me she missed me. She mentioned that being at our daughter's wedding brought back memories of the love we once shared and the family we had. She expressed regret over her actions that led to the downfall of our family and hoped that one day I could find it in my heart to forgive her. She attempted to cry on my shoulder, but I gently pushed her away, telling her not to ruin my suit. Then I went back inside to celebrate my daughter's special day. My daughter wanted us both to take pictures together, so I did it for her sake. Honestly, I can't stand being around this woman, but she always seems to find her way to me. I tried mingling with others, making sure everyone was fine, but when I turned around, she was right there behind me. I asked her politely, "Can you please step away?" She held onto my shoulder and pleaded, "Please listen to me, please." My daughter's cousins were watching us, and I could tell they were embarrassed by their aunt, just like I would be. Eventually, we went back outside. I shouted at her, "What do you need?" She told me she had to undergo surgery for an issue with her reproductive system, some kind of cyst, and reassured me she would be okay. She said she felt alone and asked if I could take care of her during the week she'd be recovering at home since our daughter would be abroad that month. I expressed my sympathy for her situation and wished her well, but I made it clear that I couldn't take care of her. She started crying again and held on to me, but I gently pulled away. She asked, "So you won't be there for someone you used to love, the mother of your child?" I replied no. Then I inquired about her best friend Kay, and she informed me that Kay was in a psychiatric hospital due to pill problems that had messed up her brain. She seems to be facing a lot of problems now, and she even attempted to harm a family member who tried to support her. I responded with a simple "oh" and turned to go back inside. Right after that, my ex-wife left. I noticed her talking to our daughter before leaving, wiping tears from her face. But that wasn't the end of it. She managed to convince our daughter that I was a terrible person for not helping her during her surgery week. Our daughter got angry and upset, thinking she might have to cancel her trip and lose the money she'd already spent on it. I have no intention of taking care of that woman ever. She should arrange for professional nursing care or something like that. It's not my responsibility. I'm not surprised at all by my ex-wife's friend Kay and her pill problem. I recall telling my ex-wife before that I suspected Kay was using something, and I meant it. She always had this hyper demeanor and sometimes seemed jittery, but my ex-wife used to insist that it was just her usual behavior. No, I think she probably had a history of pill use, and she may have accidentally taken something laced with something harmful. When my daughter called me, she was in tears, saying I was being too hard on her mother. She understood what her mom had done to me, but she believed I should still be there for her, as it's the right thing to do. I told her that it wasn't going to happen and I wouldn't be taking care of her mom. She has other family who should take care of her, and it's not my responsibility. I made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with her mom. I tried to explain this to my daughter, but she just couldn't seem to grasp it. Nonetheless, my daughter didn't cancel her trip. She went ahead with it. My ex-wife made one final attempt to get me to help her, and it came with tears. I received a call from her sister's phone and briefly spoke to her sister. She said, "I'm calling on behalf of my sister, your ex-wife. She wants to talk to you." I declined and explained that I knew what this was about and I didn't want to hear it. Her sister went on to say that no one else was available to help, and the surgery needed to be done urgently. She even offered to pay me to do it, but I firmly refused, saying, "There's not enough money in the world to make me help." I asked her to stop calling me. My ex-wife then got on the phone and asked me to stop being so stubborn and do what I'm supposed to do. I pulled the phone away from my face and just stared at it, thinking, what am I supposed to do? I thought to myself, is she joking? I brought the phone back to my ear and asked her what she meant. She replied, "Yes, we're divorced, but we were once married, and we used to be in love. Love doesn't just vanish. How can I still have so much love for you while you don't feel the same for me? You love our daughter, but you don't love me. It doesn't make sense." In response, I wished her luck with her surgery and then hung up. Afterward, I blocked her sister's number. I went ahead and blocked every one of her family members in my phone because I didn't want people texting or calling me, pleading with me to come take care of her. She's not my responsibility. If she hadn't betrayed me and had still been my wife, I'd have done anything for her. But considering the way she wronged me, possibly jeopardized my health, and tore my family apart, you're telling me I should help her? It's my duty as an ex-husband? Is that really a thing? Honestly, if any ex-husband is going out of their way to assist their ex-wife who hurt them, something seems seriously wrong, and they should seek help. It doesn't make sense to me. Just like her best friend Kay, who ended up in a psychiatric hospital due to similar issues. I haven't heard from my ex-wife, and I have no idea how her surgery went. Truthfully, I don't wish harm upon her, but I hope her surgery went smoothly. I'm not that kind of person, but I won't be persuaded to come care for her, help her get back on her feet, only to be mistreated again.
Story 3.
The rhythmic sound of knife against cutting board filled the kitchen as John Morgan prepared dinner, each slice precise and measured. Golden afternoon light streamed through the bay windows, casting long shadows across the granite countertops. He'd always found peace in cooking, but today something felt off. Mary should have been home 20 minutes ago from her yoga class. 15 years of marriage had taught him her routines by heart. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Yoga at 4:30, home by 6 o'clock. She'd never been late without calling. John set down the knife and checked his phone again. No messages. The sound of a car door closing drew his attention. Through the kitchen window, he watched Mary step out of her white Mercedes, designer yoga bag slung over her shoulder. Something about her movements seemed different, more deliberate, almost rehearsed. She paused at the front door longer than usual, as if gathering courage. When she finally entered, her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with an unfamiliar hesitation. John resumed chopping carrots, maintaining his routine while his instincts screamed that something was wrong. "We need to talk," Mary said from the kitchen doorway, her voice carrying an edge he'd never heard before. John set down his knife and turned to face his wife. She stood with perfect posture in her expensive yoga outfit, blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, not a strand out of place. But her face, that carefully maintained mask of suburban perfection, showed cracks he'd never seen before. "What's on your mind?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dish towel. His own voice remained steady, despite the sudden tightness in his chest. Mary took a deep breath, her shoulders squaring as if preparing for battle. Her next words shattered 15 years of marriage like a sledgehammer through glass. "I don't love you anymore, and I want a divorce." The kitchen fell silent. Even the gentle hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade away. John studied his wife's face, noting the flush in her cheeks, the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes couldn't quite meet his. Years of high-stakes business negotiations had taught him to read people's tells, and Mary was showing all the signs of someone who had more to say. "That's quite the announcement," he said, his voice carefully controlled. He leaned back against the counter, creating an illusion of casualness while his mind raced. "Any particular reason? Or did you just wake up this morning and decide our marriage was over?" Mary's blue eyes hardened, her chin lifting in defiance. "I've met someone else. His name is Victor." The name hung in the air between them like poison. John's fingers tightened on the dish towel, but his face remained impassive. "Victor," he repeated, the name bitter on his tongue. "And how long has Victor been in the picture?" 6 months, Mary replied, a note of challenge in her voice. "He makes me feel alive again, John. He understands me in ways you never have." 6 months. Half a year of lies and betrayal while he'd been working 60-hour weeks to maintain their lifestyle. John's mind raced through recent memories, Mary's sudden interest in yoga, her new wardrobe, the late-night texts she claimed were from her sister. All the pieces falling into place like a twisted puzzle. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "I want an open marriage," Mary declared, pacing now, her movements agitated. "At least for now. Victor and I need time to explore our relationship to see where this could go. I need to find my happiness, John." A harsh laugh escaped him before he could stop it. "Your happiness? Of course. And what about my happiness, Mary? Did that factor into your plans at all?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "This could work for both of us. You could see other people too. We could both have our freedom while maintaining our lifestyle." The last word caught his attention. Lifestyle. There was the real reason for this charade of an open marriage. Mary didn't want to lose her comfortable life, the house, the country club membership, all the trappings of success he'd built through years of sacrifice. "Doesn't sound too bad, dear," he said, his lips curving into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you tell me more about Victor? Since we're being so honest with each other." Relief flooded Mary's face, quickly replaced by animation as she began to talk about her lover. "He's incredible, John. He's a real estate developer, so successful, and he has such vision. The way he talks about his projects, the passion he brings to everything." John let her words wash over him, cataloging every detail while maintaining his mask of mild interest. Inside, rage burned through his veins like acid. Every word she spoke about Victor was another betrayal, another knife in his back. But he kept smiling, kept nodding, all while his mind began to work. "He sounds fascinating," John interrupted smoothly. "I assume he's married?" Mary's expression flickered. "Divorced 3 years ago. His ex-wife couldn't handle his dedication to his work." "How convenient," John murmured. "And where did you meet this paragon of virtue?" "At the charity gala for the Children's Hospital," Mary said, her eyes taking on a dreamy quality. "Remember? When you had to leave early for that conference call with Beijing?" John remembered with perfect clarity. He'd spent 2 hours on that call, securing a deal that had earned their company millions. He'd apologized to Mary repeatedly for leaving early, brought her favorite flowers the next day to make up for it. While he'd been working to secure their future, she'd been starting an affair with another man. "The Children's Hospital Gala," he repeated softly. "When I was on that call that paid for the tennis bracelet you're wearing right now." Mary's hand went unconsciously to her wrist, fingers touching the diamonds he'd given her as a thank you for her understanding that night. A flicker of shame crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "It's not about the money, John. It's about connection, about feeling understood and appreciated. Victor listens to me, really listens. When was the last time you did that?" "Probably around the same time you started lying to me," John replied, his tone still conversational despite the growing darkness in his eyes. 6 months ago, wasn't it? When you suddenly developed an interest in yoga?" Mary flinched at his words, but rallied quickly. "This is exactly why I'm doing this. You're always so cold, so calculating. Everything's about business with you. Victor shows me passion, romance dash. Victor shows you what you want to see." John cut in, his voice sharp. "But we're getting off track. You want an open marriage. You want to keep this house, your car, your country club membership, while you explore your relationship with Victor. Is that about right? When you say it like that, you make it sound so mercenary, Mary protested. Don't I? John turned back to his vegetables, picking up his knife again. Well, who am I to stand in the way of true love? Why don't you go get changed? Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Mary hesitated, clearly thrown by his apparent acceptance. You're okay with this? I'm processing, John replied, his knife moving with mechanical precision through the carrots. It's a lot to take in, but we're both adults, aren't we? We can handle this maturely. After Mary left the kitchen, John stood motionless, staring at the half-chopped vegetables. His hand tightened on the knife handle until his knuckles turned white. The rage he'd suppressed threatened to overwhelm him, but he forced it down, channeling it into something colder, more focused. An image flashed through his mind. Himself at 12 years old, watching his alcoholic father walk out on their family, leaving them with nothing. He'd sworn then that he would never be weak, never be a victim. He'd built himself up from nothing, fought his way out of poverty through sheer determination and cunning. He hadn't gotten where he was by showing weakness or accepting defeat. The knife in his hand suddenly felt very heavy. It would be so easy to follow Mary upstairs, to let the rage take over. But that would be weak, emotional, predictable. No, this required something else entirely. Something cold, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Mary and Victor thought they could play him for a fool. They had no idea what they'd awakened. John set the knife down carefully and pulled out his phone. He had calls to make, preparations to begin. By the time he was done, both Mary and Victor would learn the true cost of betrayal. Over the next week, John threw himself into gathering intelligence. His home office became a command center, multiple monitors displaying various surveillance feeds and data streams. He'd always been methodical in business. Now he applied that same precision to destroying his wife's affair. The technical preparations proved surprisingly simple. Mary had always been careless with her passwords, using the same ones across multiple accounts. Within days, John had access to everything: her email, social media, banking records. The keystroke logger he installed on her laptop captured every message, every search, every deleted draft. But the real gold mine came from her phone. A few carefully installed apps gave him access to her location, messages, and call history. He even had remote access to her microphone, though he used that sparingly. Not wanting to risk detection, the story that emerged from the data made his blood boil. The affair hadn't started at the charity gala. That was just their first physical encounter. They'd been flirting for weeks before that, exchanging increasingly intimate messages. Mary had been planning her exit strategy for months. One evening, while Mary was at yoga, John sat in his office reviewing their text history. The casual intimacy of their messages felt like acid in his veins. Victor, miss you already. Last night was incredible. Mary, I can still feel your touch. John's working late again. Wish you were here instead. Victor, soon beautiful. We just need to be patient a little longer. Mary, I hate lying to him, but I've never felt this way before. You make me feel so alive. John's fingers tightened on his mouse, the plastic creaking under his grip. He forced himself to keep reading, to catalog every betrayal, every lie. Each message strengthened his resolve. The financial trails were equally illuminating. Mary had been moving small amounts of money from their joint accounts into a private one, building a nest egg for her new life. Victor had helped her set it up. Using his business connections to keep it hidden, John pulled up Victor's background check on another monitor. The man's business dealings were a web of shell companies and questionable transactions. He specialized in buying distressed properties, using high-pressure tactics to force out existing tenants before renovating and flipping the buildings for massive profits. Quite the humanitarian you've fallen for, Mary, John muttered, making notes on Victor's various legal entanglements. All of it would be useful later. That a notification popped up on his phone. Mary was leaving her yoga studio. John switched to the surveillance camera he'd positioned in the parking lot. He watched as she walked to her car, phone pressed to her ear. Laughing at something Victor was saying, she looked happy, carefree, like a woman in love. The sight made John's stomach turn. Back at home, Mary breezed into his office, still flushed from her workout. She started doing that lately, checking on him, playing the attentive wife. her guilt manifesting as false concern. "You're working too hard," she said, resting her hands on his shoulders. "Why don't you take a break? We could watch a movie together." John kept his eyes on his legitimate work documents, pulled up just before she entered. "Maybe later. I have a conference call with Singapore in 20 minutes. "Always working," Mary sighed, but her tone was relieved rather than disappointed. "Don't stay up too late." After she left, John switched back to his surveillance feeds. He pulled up the camera footage from Victor's office building, watching as Mary's car pulled into the private parking garage. She'd started taking different routes there. Thinking she was being clever about covering her tracks, that John's phone buzzed another text notification. "Mary, just left the gym. Missing you already. Victor, come over." "John's busy working anyway." "Mary, on my way. Can't wait to feel your arms around me." John allowed himself a cold smile. They thought they were so careful, so secretive. They had no idea they were performing for an audience. The next day, John expanded his surveillance network. He hired a private investigator to track Victor's movements, documenting his daily routines and business meetings. The PI's reports revealed a man living well beyond his means, leveraging massive debt to maintain his image of success. "Your successful developer is swimming in red ink, Mary," John murmured, reviewing the financial records. Victor had refinanced his properties multiple times, using each loan to pay off the previous one. One bad quarter, one deal falling through, and his entire empire would collapse. The PI's photos showed Victor meeting with various business associates in expensive restaurants, always picking up the tab with flashy credit cards. He drove a new Mercedes, wore bespoke suits, maintained a luxury apartment downtown. All of it financed with smoke and mirrors. John began mapping out Victor's schedule, noting patterns and vulnerabilities. The man was creatures of habit. Gym every morning at 6, coffee at the same cafe, lunch meetings at a rotating selection of upscale restaurants. He spent most evenings at his office, often working past midnight, except for the evenings Mary visited. Those nights, Victor left work early, picking up wine and takeout from expensive restaurants. They'd eat in his apartment, spending hours together while John pretended to work late. The surveillance revealed other details: the ways Victor touched Mary in public. Always careful, but possessive. The gifts he bought her, charged to business accounts. The way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. John documented everything, building a comprehensive picture of their affair. But it wasn't enough to just know about their betrayal. He needed leverage, ammunition for what was to come. That he focused particularly on Victor's business dealings, using his own connections to dig deeper into the man's finances. The picture that emerged was damning. Fraudulent loan applications, bribes to city officials, illegal renovation schemes. Victor had built his empire on a foundation of corruption and exploitation. One evening, John discovered a series of emails between Victor and a city council member, discussing kickbacks for expedited permits. He saved the emails carefully, along with records of suspicious wire transfers. All of it would be useful when the time came to destroy Victor's reputation, but the most valuable intelligence came from Mary herself. She'd grown comfortable with John's apparent acceptance of their open marriage, letting her guard down more each day. She talked freely about Victor now, sharing details of their relationship without realizing she was giving John ammunition. "Victor's taking me to Paris next month," she mentioned casually over dinner one evening. "Just a quick business trip, but it'll be romantic." John nodded, noting the dates in his mental calendar. "Sounds lovely. His development business must be doing well." "Oh yes," Mary beamed, oblivious to the predatory gleam in her husband's eyes. "He just closed a huge deal downtown. He's going to transform the whole neighborhood." Later, John looked up the huge deal, a cluster of rundown apartments Victor had bought through a shell company. The tenants were already receiving eviction notices, their lives destroyed so Victor could build luxury condos. That John's surveillance operation expanded further. He placed cameras in the cafe where Mary and Victor met for lunch, bribed Victor's building manager for access to security footage, even planted a listening device in Victor's car. The amount of information became overwhelming, so John developed a system to organize it all. One monitor displayed real-time surveillance feeds. Another showed financial transactions and email traffic, A third tracked their movements through GPS. He started noticing patterns in their behavior, the way they coordinated their stories, the careful timing of their meetings, the elaborate precautions they thought would keep their affair hidden. It would have worked against a normal husband, someone who wasn't willing to go to such extremes, but John wasn't normal, and he was prepared to go to any lengths necessary for his revenge. His patience paid off one evening when he intercepted a particularly revealing series of messages between Mary and Victor. Everything's arranged for after the divorce. The villa in France is perfect. Mary, I can't wait to start our new life together. Away from all this pretense. Victor, just a few more months of playing along. Then you'll never have to see him again. Mary, sometimes I feel guilty, but then I remember how happy you make me. Victor, he doesn't deserve you. Never did. We're meant to be together. John saved the messages with the others, his face a mask of cold fury in the blue glow of the monitors. They were planning to elope, to take their fairy tale romance to France while leaving him with nothing but betrayal and humiliation. The final piece of surveillance equipment arrived the next day, a sophisticated GPS tracker that he carefully installed under Mary's car while she slept. Now he could track her movements with perfect precision, building a complete picture of her routines and habits. Every piece of information, every recorded conversation, every tracked movement brought him closer to his goal. The surveillance phase was nearly complete. Soon it would be time to move from observation to action. John's research into the darker corners of the internet began late one night, after Mary had gone to bed. The regular channels of revenge divorce lawyers, private investigators, financial penalties wouldn't be enough. He needed something more permanent, more devastating. It took weeks of careful navigation through encrypted networks and anonymous forums before he made contact with Mr. Black. The man's reputation preceded him. He specialized in making problems disappear, permanently and traceably. Their first meeting was set for midnight at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. John arrived an hour early, parking his car in a shadowy corner where he could observe the approaches. He'd come armed to precaution he hoped wouldn't be necessary. The black SUV appeared precisely at midnight, its engine barely audible as it glided to a stop. Mr. Black emerged, a medium-sized man in an expensive suit, his features unremarkable except for eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Mr. Morgan," he said, sliding into the passenger seat of John's car. His voice was soft, cultured, at odds with his deadly reputation. "I understand you have a problem that needs solving." John handed over a thick envelope. "Half now, half when it's done. I want her gone, completely gone. No body. No traces, nothing that could ever lead back to me." Mr. Black thumbed through the cash without counting it. "And the target?" John passed over a file containing Mary's photographs, schedule, and regular haunts. "My wife. She takes the same route to her yoga class 3 times a week. Always alone, always predictable. And you understand that once this is in motion, there's no turning back." Mr. Black's voice was neutral, professional. "She won't be killed. That leaves too much evidence. She'll be transported overseas, lost in a system where no one will ever find her." "I understand perfectly," John replied, his voice equally devoid of emotion. "How long do you need to set it up?" 2 weeks to arrange the logistics. "Then we'll need you to get her to the right place at the right time." Mr. Black studied John's face. "Most men in your position act out of passion, make mistakes. You're different." "This isn't passion," John said, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "This is business." They spent the next hour discussing details, timing, location, contingency plans. Mr. Black's thoroughness impressed John. Every aspect was considered, every potential problem anticipated and solved. After Mr. Black left, John sat in his car for a long time, staring at the warehouse's crumbling walls. He'd just set in motion events that would destroy 2 lives. There should have been hesitation, doubt, perhaps even guilt. Instead, he felt only a grim satisfaction. The next phase required careful groundwork. John began gathering items from Mary's closet, a scarf here, a piece of jewelry there. Things she wouldn't immediately notice were missing. Each item would later be planted in Victor's house or car, building a trail of evidence. That he also started working on the digital trail. Using his tech skills, he created a series of emails and text messages that, when discovered, would suggest an increasingly hostile relationship between Mary and Victor. Arguments about money, about their future, about Victor's controlling behavior, all carefully backdated and stored for later US.at home. John played his role perfectly. He attended marriage counseling sessions with Mary, listening patiently as she talked about her needs and desires. He even went on a few dates with other women, making sure Mary knew about them, reinforcing her belief that he was accepting their new arrangement. "I'm glad you're being so understanding," Mary said one evening as they sat across from each other at dinner. "Victor was worried you might make things difficult." John took a sip of wine, suppressing the urge to throw the glass in her face. "Victor seems to worry a lot about me, for someone who's sleeping with my wife." Mary flinched at his tone. "I thought we agreed not to be bitter about this." "Not bitter at all," John replied, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Just making an observation. How is Victor, by the way? Still planning that new development downtown?" "Yes, actually. The city council just approved his permits." Mary brightened, always eager to talk about her lover's accomplishments. "He's really making a name for himself in the development world." "We should all have dinner together sometime," John suggested, watching her reaction carefully. "Clear the air." Mary's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You want to have dinner with Victor?" "Why not? We're all adults, aren't we? And if this arrangement is going to work, we should at least be civil." John observed the mix of relief and suspicion in her expression. "I'll talk to him about it," she said finally. "That's very mature of you, John." "I'm full of surprises," he replied, raising his wine glass in a mock toast. Later that night, John finalized the last details of his plan. The pieces were all in place: the surveillance, the evidence trail, the arrangements with Mr. Black. Now he just needed the right opportunity to put everything in motion. That opportunity came sooner than expected. Mary suggested a weekend away to work on their relationship. She presented it as her idea, unaware that John had carefully manipulated her into making the suggestion through weeks of subtle hints and discussions in therapy. "There's this lovely boutique hotel upstate," she said over breakfast. "Very private, very exclusive. I thought maybe we could spend a weekend there, really talk things through." John looked up from his newspaper, keeping his expression carefully neutral. "Just the two of us?" "Of course," Mary replied, reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I know things have been complicated, but I still care about you, John. I want us to find a way forward that works for everyone." John turned his hand over, squeezing her fingers gently while suppressing the urge to break them. "That sounds perfect. Why don't you make the arrangements? You always were better at planning these things." Mary beamed, already pulling out her phone to check dates. John watched her, marveling at how easily she switched between betraying him and playing the caring wife. It only strengthened his resolve that night. He contacted Mr. Black to set the final phase in motion. The hotel Mary had chosen was perfect, isolated, with minimal security and plenty of blind spots in their camera coverage. Everything was falling into place. As he lay in bed that night, listening to Mary's steady breathing beside him, John allowed himself to imagine the future. Soon, she would be gone, vanished into the vast underground networks that swallowed people whole. Victor would be destroyed, his reputation in tatters, his freedom taken away. And John? John would be the grieving husband, the victim of a tragic love triangle gone wrong, that he turned onto his side, away from Mary's sleeping form, and smiled in the darkness. The time for patience was almost over. Soon, very soon, they would both learn the price of betrayal. John adjusted his tie in the mirror, preparing for the dinner he'd arranged with Victor. The restaurant he'd chosen was expensive and public, the perfect setting for the next phase of his plan. His reflection showed a man in control, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, not a hint of the rage burning beneath the surface. "Are you sure about this?" Mary asked from the doorway, fidgeting with her diamond bracelet. "Dinner with Victor. It might be awkward." John turned to face his wife, offering a practiced smile. "We're all adults, aren't we? Besides, I should meet the man who's sleeping with my wife." "John, please don't be crude," Mary said, crossing her arms. "I thought you were okay with this arrangement." "I'm just stating facts," John replied, checking his watch. "We should go. Wouldn't want to keep Victor waiting." The drive to the restaurant was tense, filled with Mary's nervous chatter about proper topics of conversation. John let her words wash over him, focusing instead on the evening ahead. Everything had to be perfect. Victor was already waiting when they arrived, standing at the bar in an expensive suit that John knew he'd charged to one of his shell companies. He was younger than John had expected, with the kind of practice charm that worked well on lonely housewives. "John," Victor said, extending his hand. "It's good to finally meet you properly." John gripped Victor's hand firmly, noting the slight whence his pressure caused. "Victor, Mary's told me so much about you. All good things, I hope." Victor laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. They were seated at a prime table, Victor pulling out Mary's chair with exaggerated gallantry. John watched the gesture with cold amusement, knowing the man's every move was calculated for effect. "So, Victor," John said as they studied their menus, "Mary tells me you're quite the successful developer." Victor smiled, clearly in his comfort zone. "I've been fortunate. My latest project downtown is going to transform the whole neighborhood." Yes, the Hamilton Street development," John nodded. "Interesting approach, buying through shell companies to avoid alerting the current residents until the eviction notices arrive." Victor's smile faltered slightly. "You seem well informed about real estate practices." "I make it my business to stay informed," John replied, taking a sip of water. "Especially about people who become involved with my wife." Mary shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "John, we agreed, it's fine, Mary," Victor cut in smoothly. "Your husband has every right to be concerned. I respect that." The waiter arrived to take their orders, providing a brief respite from the tension. John watched as Victor ordered an expensive wine, noting the way he hesitated slightly before giving his credit card. "Tell me, Victor," John said once the waiter left, "how did you handle your divorce? Mary mentioned it was complicated." Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "These things usually are, but that's in the past." "Is it?" John leaned forward slightly. "I heard your ex-wife had some interesting things to say about your methods of conflict resolution." "I don't think this is appropriate dinner conversation," Mary interjected, her voice sharp. John raised his hands in mock surrender. "You're right, of course. We should focus on the future, not the past. Speaking of which, Victor, how are those permit applications for the Hamilton Street project coming along?" "Everything's proceeding according to plan," Victor replied, but John noticed a bead of sweat on his forehead. "Really? I heard Councilman Roberts can be quite demanding when it comes to expediting permits. The right incentives must help, though." The color drained from Victor's face. Before he could respond, the wine arrived, and John watched with satisfaction as Victor's hand trembled slightly while signing the check. The rest of the dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance, with John dropping subtle hints about everything he knew while maintaining a facade of polite interest. He watched Victor grow increasingly uncomfortable, while Mary became more and more agitated. "I have to say, Victor," John said as they finished their main course, "you've built quite an impressive operation. All those shell companies, the complex financial arrangements, it must take a lot of work to keep everything legitimate." Victor dabbed his mouth with his napkin, his composure cracking. "What exactly are you implying, John?" "Implying? Nothing at all. I'm just making conversation." John smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Though I must admit, I'm curious about your relationship with certain members of the city council. They seem very accommodating to your projects." "John, stop it," Mary hissed, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "What's wrong, dear? I thought you wanted us all to be honest with each other." John turned back to Victor. "Speaking of honesty, have you told Mary about the true state of your finances? About the loans you've been juggling?" Victor's knuckles whitened around his wine glass. "I don't know what you think you know. I know everything," John cut him off softly. "Every shell company, every bribe, every fraudulent loan application. I know about the offshore accounts, the kickbacks, even that interesting conversation you had with Councilman Roberts last week about expediting the permit process." The silence that followed was deafening. Mary looked between them, confusion and fear warring on her face. Victor sat frozen, his practiced charm evaporating under John's steady gaze. "Why are you doing this?" Mary demanded, her voice trembling. "Doing what?" I thought we were having a friendly dinner. John signaled the waiter for the check. Getting to know each other better. Isn't that what you wanted? As they stood to leave, John placed a hand on Victor's shoulder, leaning in close. A word of advice, he murmured, too quietly for Mary to hear. Be careful with other men's wives. You never know what kind of husband you might be dealing with. Victor jerked away, his face pale. Is that a threat? A threat? John laughed softly. No, Victor. Just a friendly warning between adults. In the car ride home, Mary exploded. What the hell was that? You promised to be civil. I thought I was very civil, John replied calmly, keeping his eyes on the road. Just getting to know your lover better. Isn't that what you wanted? You were threatening him. Was I? I was just making conversation. Though I notice you're more concerned about his comfort than the fact that he's been lying to you about his business dealings. Mary fell silent, staring out the window. John could see her mind working, processing everything she'd heard. Perfect back home. Mary stormed upstairs without another word. John went to his office, pulling up the surveillance feeds. As expected, Mary was already on the phone with Victor. He knows something, Victor was saying, his voice tense. How the hell does he know about Roberts? I don't know, Mary replied, pacing their bedroom. He's been acting strange lately, but what are we going to do? Nothing, Victor said firmly. He's just trying to intimidate us. He can't prove anything. John smiled in the darkness of his office. Let them think this was just intimidation. Let them believe they still had the upper hand. Soon enough, they'd learn just how wrong they were. He opened his laptop and began typing an anonymous email to the city's ethics board, attaching carefully selected documents about Victor's dealings with Councilman Roberts. Just enough to start an investigation, but not enough to trigger immediate action. The pressure needed to build slowly, phase when setting the trap was complete. Victor was rattled. Mary was questioning her choices, and the seeds of doubt had been planted. Now it was time to move on to phase 2. The following week, John arranged another meeting with Mr. Black, this time in an underground parking garage downtown. The echo of his footsteps bounced off concrete walls as he approached the black SUV. Your performance at dinner was impressive, Mr. Black said as John slid into the passenger seat. Victor's been making some very interesting phone calls since then. You've been monitoring him? John asked, though he already knew the answer. Of course. He's called his lawyers 6 times in the past 3 days. Made several large withdrawals from various accounts. He's scared. Mr. Black handed over a USB drive. Here's everything we've recorded. You might find some of the conversations with your wife particularly interesting. Back in his office, John plugged in the drive and started listening to the recordings. Victor's voice came through clearly, panic evident in his tone. We need to move faster, Victor was saying. John knows too much. He's dangerous. You're overreacting, Mary replied, but uncertainty tinged her voice. He's just trying to scare us. John's never been violent. This isn't about violence. Victor snapped. He knows about my business dealings, Mary. Things he couldn't possibly know unless he's been investigating me. Do you have any idea what that could do to me? What are you saying? I'm saying we need to get out now. Forget waiting for the divorce. I can have the villa ready in a week. We'll go to France, start fresh, leave everything behind, just like that. Would you rather stay and watch your husband destroy everything I've built? John smiled as he listened to their panic. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. He picked up his phone and dialed Victor's private number. John. Victor answered on the first ring, trying and failing to sound confident. What do you want? Just checking in after our lovely dinner, John replied smoothly. I hope we might continue our discussion about your business practices. Perhaps over lunch? Listen, Victor's voice hardened. If you think you can blackmail me, blackmail? I'm wounded, Victor. Can't 2 men who share the same woman have a civilized conversation? This isn't a game, John. No, it's not. Games are fun. This is business. John's voice dropped to a whisper. And you're playing with money you don't have, aren't you, Victor? Those loans are coming due soon. Be a shame if your creditors started asking questions about your collateral. You son of a... Lunch tomorrow, 1 o'clock. The Capitol Grill. Don't keep me waiting. John hung up before Victor could respond. Mary was waiting for him in the kitchen when he came downstairs, her face tight with anger. What are you doing, John? Having lunch with a friend tomorrow. Why? Stop playing games. Victor told me about your phone call, about your threats. John opened the refrigerator, taking out a bottle of water. Did he also tell you about the millions he's borrowed against properties he doesn't own? About the bribes, the fraud, the... Stop it. Mary slammed her hand on the counter. Just stop it. Why are you doing this? John turned to face her, his expression cold. Because actions have consequences, Mary. You and Victor thought you could play me for a fool. Thought you could take what's mine and walk away laughing. Well, surprise, I'm not as stupid as you thought. We never thought what? That I'd find out about the money you've been moving to your private account? About your plans to elope to France? About all the nights you spent in his bed while I was working to pay for everything you have? Mary's face went pale. How did I know? I know everything, Mary. Every lie, every betrayal, every little plan you two made. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And now you get to watch while I take it all apart, piece by piece. You're insane, Mary whispered, backing away. No, I'm methodical. There's a difference. John smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some work to do before my lunch meeting tomorrow. The next day, John arrived at the Capitol Grill early, selecting a table where they could speak privately. Victor arrived 10 minutes late, sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. Sit down, Victor, John said pleasantly. You look nervous. What do you want? Victor demanded, dropping into his chair. Money? Is that it? John laughed softly. Money? Please. I'll make more in a month than you earn in a year legitimately, I might add. No, what I want is much simpler. Then what? I want you to understand something. John leaned forward, his voice dropping. Every deal you've made, every bribe you've paid, every fraudulent document you've filed, I have proof of all of it. One phone call, and your entire house of cards comes crashing down. You're bluffing. Am I? John pulled out his phone, showing Victor a series of documents. These are copies of your conversations with Councilman Roberts. Your offshore account numbers. The real financial statements from your development projects. Should I go on? Victor's face had gone ashen. What do you want me to do? For now, nothing. Just sit there and think about how completely I could destroy you. John signaled the waiter. Shall we order? I recommend the ribeye. It might be your last expensive meal for a while. The rest of lunch passed in tense silence, broken only by John's casual comments about Victor's various criminal activities. By the time they finished, Victor was visibly shaking. One more thing, John said as they stood to leave. Mary mentioned you're planning a trip to France soon. I'd reconsider if I were you. It would look very suspicious if you left the country right before everything falls apart. You can't do this, Victor said, his voice hoarse. I already am. John clapped him on the shoulder. Give my best to Mary. Oh, and Victor? Sleep well. That evening, John met with Mr. Black again to finalize the details of Mary's disappearance. The plan was coming together perfectly. Victor was unraveling. Mary was questioning everything, and neither of them suspected what was really coming. The team is in position, Mr. Black reported. We can move whenever you're ready. Good. John handed over another envelope of cash. I want everything in place before I arrange the weekend trip. No mistakes. There won't be. Though I have to ask, why go to all this trouble with Victor? Why not just have her disappear now? John's smile was chilling. Because I want him to suffer first. I want him to feel everything falling apart, to know it's all his fault. And when Mary disappears, I want him to know that he led her right to it. Back home, John found Mary waiting in his office, her face streaked with tears. Victor's thinking of leaving, she said without preamble. He says you're going to destroy him. Is that what he says? John kept his voice neutral. And what do you think? I think you're being cruel. This isn't like you, John. No. Then what am I like, Mary? The fool who worked 80-hour weeks while his wife fucked another man? The idiot who paid for everything while you planned to run away with your lover? It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. John's voice cracked like a whip. You and Victor thought you were so clever, so careful. But you never stopped to think about who you were dealing with. Never considered that I might not be the passive, accepting husband you thought I was. Mary's face crumpled. What happened to you? Nothing happened to me. I just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. John turned to his computer, dismissing her. You should call Victor. Tell him everything will be fine if he just plays along. After all, isn't that what you've been doing? After Mary left, John pulled up the surveillance feeds. As expected, she was already on the phone with Victor, her voice frantic as she tried to calm him down. John listened with satisfaction as their perfect world continued to crumble. Everything was proceeding according to plan. Soon, it would be time for the final phase, the weekend trip that would end with Mary's disappearance and Victor's destruction. But first, John had a few more cards to play. That he opened his laptop and began composing an anonymous tip to the SEC about Victor's financial dealings. Just enough to start an investigation, but not enough to trigger immediate action. The pressure needed to build slowly, inexorably, until there was no escape. The boutique hotel's website showed elegant rooms with mountain views, isolated hiking trails, and promises of perfect privacy. John studied the photos carefully while Mary finalized their reservation, each click of her mouse bringing them closer to the end. I got us the luxury suite, Mary announced, trying to sound cheerful. It has a private balcony overlooking the lake. Sounds perfect, John replied, noting how her hands trembled slightly as she closed her laptop. Just what we need to reconnect. John, Mary hesitated, then continued. About Victor, let's not discuss him right now, John interrupted smoothly. This weekend is about us, remember? The fear and relief that flickered across Mary's face told him everything. She thought this weekend was her chance to fix things, to convince John to stop his campaign against Victor. She had no idea she was walking into a trap of her own making. Later that evening, John met Mr. Black in a deserted parking structure to finalize the details. The man's quiet efficiency continued to impress him. Everything's in place, Mr. Black reported, handing over a detailed timeline. My team will intercept her during her morning jog. The trails are isolated, no witnesses. By the time anyone notices she's missing, she'll be halfway across the ocean. And the evidence pointing to Victor? All prepared. Hotel security footage will show them arguing the night before. Her phone will ping near his house after she disappears. Police will find her jewelry in his car. Mr. Black's lips curved in a rare smile. He's already unstable from your pressure. When she vanishes, he'll crack. John nodded, reviewing the timeline. What about the police investigation? Anonymous tips will start coming in immediately. Witnesses who saw them arguing. Evidence of financial transactions. Everything pointing to a man who couldn't handle his lover trying to break things off. The next morning, John found Mary in their walk-in closet, packing for the weekend. He leaned against the doorframe, watching as she carefully selected outfits she would never wear. Don't forget your running shoes, he suggested. I hear the trails are beautiful in the morning. Mary jumped slightly at his voice. Yes, I thought I might try jogging again. Clear my head? Good idea. We have a lot to discuss. John stepped into the closet, running his fingers along her hanging clothes. I've been thinking about what happens after this weekend. What do you mean? About our future. About what we both want. He turned to face her. Maybe it's time for a fresh start. Hope flickered in Mary's eyes. Really? You mean that? Of course. We can't go on like this forever, can we? John picked up one of her silk scarves, letting it slip through his fingers. Something has to change. Mary stepped closer, touching his arm. John, I know things have been difficult. With Victor's not important right now. John cut in, though they both knew it was a lie. This weekend is about us. About decisions that need to be made. What kind of decisions? The kind that change lives? John smiled, knowing she would misinterpret it as warmth rather than satisfaction. Pack the blue dress. The one you wore to the charity gala. Mary's hand fell away from his arm. They both knew that was the dress she'd worn when she first met Victor. Why that one? Let's call it symbolic. John turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Mary? Make sure you bring your passport, just in case we decide to extend our little getaway. He felt her eyes on his back as he left the closet, imagining the thoughts racing through her mind. Would she call Victor? Almost certainly. Would that change anything? Not at all. I in his office. John pulled up the surveillance feed, just in time to see Mary reaching for her phone with shaking hands. Victor? We need to talk. Her voice trembled. John's acting strange. He wants me to bring my passport to the hotel this weekend. What? Why? Victor's panic was evident even through the phone. Mary, this doesn't feel right. He's planning something. He says he wants to make a fresh start, that he's ready for changes. And you believe him? After everything he's done to me? My investors are pulling out. The SEC is asking questions. And now this. What choice do I have? Mary's voice cracked. If I don't go, he'll know something's wrong. He'll come after you even harder. Then let him. I can handle the business problems. But if something happens to you, nothing's going to happen, Mary insisted. But she didn't sound convinced. It's a public place, a luxury hotel. What could he possibly do? John smiled at her naivety. The pieces were falling into perfectly place. Every action, every word driving them exactly where he wanted them. He picked up his own phone and dialed Mr. Black. Is everything ready for this weekend? All set, Mr. Black confirmed. My team will be in position Friday morning. The boat leaves Saturday night. No one will connect her disappearance to you, and the evidence against Victor? Being planted as we speak. His gardener is on our payroll. He'll find one of her bracelets in the bushes under his bedroom window. Police will discover more items during their search. Perfect. John ended the call and turned back to his surveillance feeds. Mary was still on the phone with Victor, their conversation growing more frantic. Maybe we should run now, Victor was saying. Forget the hotel. I can have the jet ready in 3 hours. And go where? He'd find us? You've seen what he can do. Mary's voice dropped to a whisper. I've never seen him like this, Victor. It's like he's become someone else. Not someone else, John murmured to the empty office. Just someone you never knew existed. The next day, John worked from home, watching Mary's increasing anxiety with cold satisfaction. She made 3 more calls to Victor, each one more desperate than the last. Between calls, she wandered the house like a ghost, jumping at small noises. Everything all right, dear? John asked over dinner, enjoying the way she flinched at his voice. You seem tense. I'm fine, Mary replied quickly. Too quickly. Just thinking about the weekend. Are we all? John raised his wine glass. To new beginnings. Mary's hand shook as she lifted her own glass. The red wine looked like blood in the dining room's dim light that night. John lay awake, listening to Mary's restless movements beside him. Everything was prepared. The trap was set. In less than 48 hours, she would disappear forever, and Victor's destruction would begin. He thought about the evidence already in place, the planted jewelry, the fabricated witnesses, the financial trails leading to Victor's accounts. The police would build a circumstantial case at first, but as more evidence emerged, as Victor's behavior became more erratic under the pressure, they would zero in on him as their prime suspect. That Mary's disappearance would be the catalyst that brought down everything Victor had built. His investors, already nervous from John's quiet campaign, would abandon him completely. The SEC investigation would accelerate. His creditors would call in their loans. And through it all, he would know with absolute certainty that John had orchestrated every moment of his destruction. That as for Mary, she would vanish into Mr. Black's network, transported to some remote corner of the world where she would learn the true cost of betrayal. No quick death, no easy escape. Just the slow realization that her comfortable life, her romantic dreams of running away with Victor, had led her into a nightmare from which there was no awakening. John smiled in the darkness as Mary tossed and turned beside him. Let her worry. Let her fear grow. It would make the weekend that much sweeter. Tomorrow, they would drive to the hotel. Tomorrow, the endgame would begin. And soon, very soon, both Mary and Victor would understand exactly who they had been dealing with all along. The mountain road curved through autumn forests, leaves burning gold and crimson in the late afternoon sun. John drove with one hand relaxed on the steering wheel, watching Mary fidget with her phone in the passenger seat. She'd been trying to text Victor discreetly for the past hour, each message more desperate than the last. No signal, John asked, knowing perfectly well that Mr. Black's team was blocking cell reception along their route. It's spotty up here, Mary replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The mountains, I guess. Isn't that the point of getting away? John smiled, watching her reflection in the windshield. No distractions, no interruptions. Just us? Mary's phone buzzed suddenly, a final message getting through before they moved out of range completely. Something's wrong. Don't go to the hotel. Meet me at dash. The signal died before Victor's full message appeared. John noticed Mary's sharp intake of breath, the way her fingers tightened around the phone. Everything okay? He asked mildly. Fine, Mary said quickly. Too quickly. Just work stuff? Victor must be worried about you going away for the weekend, John commented, taking another curve with precise control. He seems the possessive type. John, please. You said we wouldn't talk about him. You're right, I apologize. John reached over and patted her hand, feeling her slight flinch at his touch. This weekend is about us. About new beginnings. The boutique hotel appeared around the next bend, a restored Victorian mansion set against the mountains. As John pulled up to the entrance, he noticed Mary scanning the parking lot, probably looking for Victor's car. She wouldn't find it. Mr. Black's team had made sure Victor was thoroughly occupied back in the city. Welcome to the Mountain View Resort. The desk clerk greeted them warmly. You must be Mr. and Mrs. Morgan. We have you in our lakeside suite. Perfect, John smiled, handling the check-in while Mary stood slightly apart, still trying to get a signal on her phone. I heard the hiking trails are excellent here. Oh yes, especially the lakeside trail in the morning. The sunrise over the water is spectacular. John accepted the room keys, noting Mary's tension as they rode the elevator to their suite. The room was exactly as advertised, spacious, elegant, with a private balcony overlooking the lake. Perfect sight lines for Mr. Black's team to monitor every approach. It's beautiful, Mary said, trying to sound enthusiastic as she set her bag down. The view is amazing. Why don't you get settled in? John suggested. I'll order us some champagne. We should celebrate our fresh start. As soon as he left the room, John pulled out his secure phone and texted Mr. Black. Everything in position? The reply came instantly. All set. Teams in place. Victor received the package. John smiled, imagining Victor's reaction to the envelope that had been delivered to his office. Photos of Mary with other men, all carefully doctored, along with bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts in her name. By now, Victor would be frantic, his calls to Mary going straight to voicemail, his text messages undelivered. When John returned to the suite, Mary was standing on the balcony, still clutching her phone. The mountain air had brought color to her cheeks, but her eyes were wide with barely controlled panic. Champagne's on the way, John announced, joining her at the railing. Beautiful evening. John, Mary turned to face him, her voice tight. I need to be honest with you about something. More honest than telling me about your affair. John's voice held just a hint of edge. More honest than planning to run away to France with Victor? Mary stepped back, color draining from her face. How did you know about France? About the villa? About the money you've been moving offshore? John's smile was cold now. I know everything, Mary. Every plan, every lie, every betrayal. You're scaring me, she whispered. Am I? Good. You should be scared. Not of me, necessarily, but of the consequences of your actions. John turned to face the lake, his voice conversational. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I would just accept your little arrangement and watch you walk away with half of everything I've built? That's not what I Don't lie to me. The words cracked like a whip, making her jump. Not now. Not after everything. Did you know Victor's business is collapsing? That he's being investigated for fraud? That every penny he promised you was borrowed against properties he doesn't own? Mary gripped the balcony railing, her knuckles white. What have you done? Me? I haven't done anything. Victor did this to himself. His house of cards was always going to fall. I helped it along a little. John checked his watch. He should be getting some interesting photos right about now. I wonder what he'll think when he sees them. What photos? Oh, just some documentation of your other affairs. All carefully backdated, of course. Very convincing. John smiled at her shocked expression. Don't worry, they're not real. But Victor won't know that. He'll just see the woman he risked everything for betraying him, just like you betrayed me. The champagne arrived then, interrupting Mary's response. John tipped the server generously, then poured 2 glasses with deliberate care. To new beginnings, he said, holding out a glass to Mary. and to facing the consequences of our choices. Mary's hand shook as she accepted the champagne. What do you want from me? Want? I don't want anything from you, Mary. This weekend isn't about what I want. John sipped his champagne, watching her over the rim of his glass. It's about what's going to happen. What has to happen? You're not making sense, aren't I? Think about it, Mary. Really think about choices, consequences, and the price of betrayal. John set his glass down carefully. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left her standing on the balcony, her champagne untouched, fear finally showing clearly in her eyes. Through the hotel surveillance system, which Mr. Black's team had accessed, John watched her spend the next hour trying desperately to contact Victor, but Victor wouldn't be answering. By now, he would be dealing with his own problems, the SEC investigators showing up unexpectedly, the bank calling in his loans. The photos suggesting Mary had been playing him for a fool all along. John sat in the suite's living room, listening to Mary's restless movements in the bedroom. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Tomorrow morning, she would go for a run along the lake trail, trying to clear her head, trying to figure out what to do, and she would never return. Dawn painted the lake in shades of gold when Mary left for her morning run. John watched from the balcony as she stretched nervously, her eyes scanning the parking lot one last time for any sign of Victor. She wore her expensive running gear, her blonde ponytail swinging as she started down the lakeside trail. John's phone buzzed with a text from Mr. Black. Teams in position. Proceeding as planned. He didn't reply, instead turning his attention to his laptop where he could monitor the hotel's security feeds. Mary's figure grew smaller as she jogged along the trail, unaware of the shadows moving through the trees around her. His phone rang. Victor. Right on schedule. Where is she? Victor's voice was ragged with panic. She's not answering her phone. Good morning to you too, Victor. John replied calmly. I assume you got my little care package? Those photos are fake. Mary would never dash. Are you sure about that? She betrayed me easily enough. What makes you think you're special? Listen to me, you psychopath, Victor snarled. If anything happens to her, dash, you'll what? John's voice turned to ice. Call the police? Tell them how you've been sleeping with my wife? How you plan to steal her away to France? How you've been bribing city officials and cooking your books? This isn't a game. No, it's not. Games have winners and losers. This? John paused, watching the security feed as Mary rounded a bend in the trail. This is justice. He ended the call and switched to the next camera feed. Mary had reached the most isolated section of the trail, where it curved between the lake and a steep rocky slope. Perfect through the camera, he watched it happen. Two men in jogging clothes appeared behind Mary. Another emerged from the trees ahead. She tried to turn back, but they were too quick. A hand clamped over her mouth. A needle found her arm, and she slumped between them. The entire operation took less than 30 seconds. The men carried Mary's unconscious form into the trees where a maintenance van waited on a service road. By the time other joggers passed that section of trail, there was no sign anything had happened. John's phone buzzed again. Mr. Black. Package secured. Proceeding to extraction point. Now came the next phase. John waited exactly 45 minutes, then called the hotel front desk. My wife went jogging this morning and hasn't returned, he reported, letting worry creep into his voice. She's usually back by now. Could someone check the trail? The hotel staff were immediately concerned. They sent security to check the trails while John made a show of calling Mary's phone repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail, exactly as planned. 2 hours later, the hotel manager stood in John's suite while local police took his statement. And when exactly did Mrs. Morgan leave for her run? The detective asked, notebook ready. Around 6:30, John replied, playing the role of concerned husband perfectly. She usually runs for 30 minutes, 45 at most. When she didn't come back, has she been under any stress lately? Any problems at home? John hesitated, then sighed heavily. She's been having an affair with a man named Victor Reynolds. We've been trying to work things out. That's why we came here this weekend. The detective's interest sharpened. Tell me about Mr. Reynolds. He's a real estate developer. They met at a charity event. John ran his hands through his hair, the picture of distress. Recently, he's been having some legal troubles. Mary was worried about him. Worried how? He's been acting erratic, calling her constantly. When she told him we were coming here this weekend, he got very upset. John looked up at the detective. You don't think he would? We'll need to speak with Mr. Reynolds, the detective said, making notes. Do you have his contact information? John provided Victor's details, then added, There's something else you should know. Yesterday, I received some disturbing photos. They suggested Mary might have been involved with other men besides Victor. When I confronted her about it, she denied everything, but did you share these photos with Mr. Reynolds? Yes. I thought he had a right to know. John buried his face in his hands. Oh God, if anything's happened to her, because of me. The detective patted his shoulder awkwardly. We'll find her, Mr. Morgan. Try to remain calm. Over the next few hours, the investigation kicked into high gear. Search teams combed the trails while divers checked the lake. Hotel security footage showed Mary starting her run, but never returning. Her phone was found in the woods. Its screen cracked. John kept his performance careful, concerned but controlled, helpful but not too helpful. He mentioned Victor's financial troubles, his increasingly obsessive behavior, the way he'd been pressuring Mary to leave with him happy evening. The police had brought Victor in for questioning. John watched through carefully planted cameras as the developer's composure cracked under interrogation. Of course I was calling her. Victor shouted at the detectives. That bastard was trying to destroy me. And he had Mary trapped up there with him. So you were concerned for Mrs. Morgan's safety? Yes. No. Victor ran his hands through his disheveled hair. You don't understand. John's been threatening me, digging into my business dealings. Tell us about the villa in France, Mr. Reynolds. Victor's face went pale. How did you? We have records of several large transfers to an account in Nice. Were you planning to take Mrs. Morgan there? This is insane, Victor muttered. He's behind this. He has to be. Mr. Reynolds, where were you between 6 and 7 a.m. this morning? I was at home, alone, sleeping. Can anyone verify that? Victor's silence was damning. The detective pushed a photo across the table. Mary's broken phone found in the woods. Your fingerprints were found on this phone, Mr. Reynolds. Want to explain that? We met sometimes. She must have handed me her phone. Or maybe you confronted her on the trail this morning. Maybe when she refused to leave with you. Things got out of hand. No, I would never hurt her. This is all John's doing. Can't you see that? But the police couldn't see it. All they saw was an unstable man with no alibi, financial problems, and an obsession with a married woman who had vanished after trying to break things off with him, in his hotel suite. John watched the interrogation with satisfaction. Victor was unraveling exactly as planned, his desperate accusations against John only making him look more guilty. His phone buzzed one final time. Mr. Black. Package en route to destination. Payment received. Pleasure doing business. John deleted the message and turned back to the window, watching police boats sweep the lake with searchlights. Soon they would find more evidence: Mary's jewelry in Victor's car, her scarf at his house, bank records showing large withdrawals on the morning she disappeared. The trap had sprung perfectly. Now all that remained was to watch Victor's destruction play out to its inevitable conclusion. The media circus descended within days of Mary's disappearance. News vans clogged the hotel parking lot, reporters fighting for the best camera angles of the lake, where police divers continued their futile search. John watched it all from his suite, playing the role of devastated husband to perfection. Mr. Morgan, a reporter caught him as he left the hotel. How are you holding up during this difficult time? John paused, letting his voice break slightly. I just want my wife back. The police are doing everything they can, but every day without news is torture. Sources say the police are focusing on Victor Reynolds as a person of interest. Did you know about their affair? I'd rather not comment on that. John looked away, shoulders slumping. This is already painful enough. The performance worked perfectly. The evening news painted him as the sympathetic husband, betrayed yet still concerned, while Victor was portrayed as the unstable lover whose obsession had turned deadly. In the police interrogation room, Victor's desperation grew with each passing day. John watched through his surveillance feeds as the developer's expensive lawyer tried to control the damage. My client had nothing to do with Mrs. Morgan's disappearance, the lawyer insisted to the detectives. Then explain the blood traces in his car. The lead detective countered, sliding photos across the table. Explain Mrs. Morgan's jewelry found in his house, hidden behind a heating vent. This is a setup. Victor slammed his hands on the table. John's behind all of this. He's framing me. Mr. Reynolds. The detective's voice was tired. We've investigated Mr. Morgan thoroughly. He was at the hotel when his wife disappeared. Multiple witnesses confirm he was in the restaurant having breakfast. Meanwhile, you have no alibi for that morning. Check his phone records. Check his bank accounts. We have. Everything checks out. You, on the other hand, the detective pulled out more documents. Large cash withdrawals the day before Mrs. Morgan disappeared. Phone records showing dozens of calls to her in the hours before. And now these emails we've recovered. Victor's face went pale as he read the emails, carefully crafted exchanges that showed him growing increasingly unstable, threatening Mary when she tried to break things off. I didn't write these, he whispered. This isn't real. Your digital signature is on them, Mr. Reynolds. They came from your email server. Victor's lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Victor shoved him away. No, I won't shut up. John Morgan is not who you think he is. He's been systematically destroying my business, threatening me, planning this whole thing. Planning what? Exactly. The detective leaned forward. Are you saying Mr. Morgan somehow forced you to make those withdrawals? Forced you to call his wife repeatedly? Planted her DNA in your car? You don't understand. Victor's voice cracked. He's a monster. He's been playing us all. The detective sighed, closing his notebook. Mr. Reynolds, unless you can provide some evidence for these accusations, I suggest you focus on explaining the very real evidence against you. Back in his hotel suite, John allowed himself a small smile. Victor's paranoid accusations only made him look more guilty. Every attempt to blame John only dug his grave deeper. His phone buzzed a text from Mr. Black. Final confirmation received. Package delivered to destination. No traces. John deleted the message and turned his attention to the news playing on his laptop. The story had gone national, featured on every major network. Missing woman case takes dark turn. Lover's obsession led to violence. The media had pieced together exactly the narrative John had crafted. They painted Victor as a failing businessman who had seduced a married woman, then turned violent when she tried to end things. His increasingly erratic behavior during questioning only reinforced this image. That a week after Mary's disappearance, the SEC announced a formal investigation into Victor's business dealings. His investors fled, his project stalled, and his carefully constructed empire began to crumble. John visited the police station daily, playing the concerned husband desperate for news. He watched Victor being led to interrogation, noted how the once polished developer had deteriorated unshaven, hollow-eyed, expensive suit wrinkled from hours of questioning. Mr. Morgan, Detective Harris caught him in the hallway. Do you have a moment? In the detective's office, John perched on the edge of a chair, the picture of anxiety. Have you found something? We've completed the forensic analysis of Mr. Reynolds' car. The blood traces match your wife's DNA. Harris paused, watching John's reaction. There wasn't much, but combined with the other evidence, John buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Oh God, then she's really... We don't know that for certain, Harris said quickly. But I have to ask, did your wife mention any places she and Mr. Reynolds might have discussed? Anywhere they planned to meet? No, wait. John looked up, face haunted. The night before she disappeared, I overheard her on the phone. Something about France. A villa, I think. Harris made notes quickly. This matches some financial records we've found. Mr. Reynolds had been making payments on a property in Nice. Nice. John let his voice crack. They were planning to go there together? It seems so. Mr. Reynolds had booked a private flight for the day after your wife disappeared. 2 passengers. John stood abruptly, pacing the small office. I can't. I need some air. In the parking lot, he allowed himself a moment of pure satisfaction. The police were following every trail he'd laid, connecting every dot exactly as planned. Soon, they would have enough to arrest Victor that evening. John received another visit from Detective Harris, this time at the hotel. We're charging him, Harris announced without preamble. The DA thinks we have enough. You're sure it's him? John asked, voice carefully uncertain. The evidence is overwhelming. His finances were collapsing. Your wife was trying to end things. And he snapped. Harris hesitated. There's something else. We found drafts of letters on his computer. Elaborate fantasies about making her disappear, starting a new life together in France. The man was delusional. John sank into a chair. Will you find her? We'll keep looking, but... Harris left the sentence unfinished. They both knew what it meant. The arrest made national headlines. Cameras captured Victor being led from his house in handcuffs, screaming about conspiracies and setups. His accusations against John were dismissed as the desperate ravings of a guilty man. 3 months later, John sat in his new apartment in another city, watching Victor's trial on television. The prosecution's case was airtight. DNA evidence, financial records, witness statements, all pointing to a possessive lover who couldn't handle rejection. That Victor's testimony was a disaster. He ranted about John's manipulation, about elaborate schemes and frame-ups, each wild accusation making him appear more unhinged. The jury took less than 6 hours to find him guilty. As Victor was led from the courtroom, his eyes found the camera. He did this, he shouted. John Morgan destroyed everything. He's the one you should be investigating. The news anchor's voice cut in smoothly, a sad end to a tragic case. Victor Reynolds, once a successful real estate developer, now faces life in prison for the murder of Mary Morgan, whose body has never been found. John muted the television and moved to his home office, where multiple monitors still displayed his surveillance feeds. He pulled up a secure browser and checked an anonymous email account. There was a new message from Mr. Black, containing only a photo Mary, hollow-eyed and aged beyond her years, working in a remote sweatshop somewhere in Southeast Asia. No one there knew her real name or history. She was just another broken soul in a place where such souls were common. John deleted the photo and cleared his browser history. He had already moved most of his assets, changed his name, established a new identity. The old John Morgan would gradually fade from existence, leaving no trail to follow. Opening his laptop, he began researching his next project. A small tech startup caught his eye, struggling but promising, run by a CEO whose wife enjoyed the finer things in life. John smiled as he read their financials. Perhaps it was time to make some new investments. After all, there were so many people in the world who needed to learn about consequences.
Story 4.
On Thursday, Bob settled at the table, eyeing his Miller Lite bottle. He opted for just a 6-pack, wary of getting drunk if things went awry soon. When the upstairs music ceased, he grasped that his wife neared completion of her preparations. Typically, Bob worked late on Thursdays due to his wife's bachelorette parties with friends. His parents took their daughter, Casey, and his wife enjoyed drinks with coworkers. He lingered, tackling paperwork to ensure an early Friday departure for family time. It all seemed meticulously planned. He carved out time in his busy schedule, his parents lavished attention on their granddaughter, and his wife relished personal time with friends. At least, that's what he believed. He was reminded of last Tuesday's lunch with Vicky by the sound of his wife ascending to the bathroom. He thought about the need to frequent the store more or inquire about delivery for those amazing sandwiches. Seating himself to monitor the door, he soon spotted a familiar figure entering the restaurant. Observing her scanning the room, Bob rose and waved. She caught sight of him and headed his way. At 31, Vicky was the eldest of his wife's former flames. Bob held a fondness for her and noted she was the only married one among them. She possessed a knack for soothing tensions without being a doormat. He had to concede, with her dark, wavy hair and fair complexion, Vicky looked quite appealing. While lacking in the chest department, she boasted a stunning face and legs for days. Her husband, Ron, regarded her as a heaven-sent gift, a sentiment reciprocated. As she settled across from him, she thanked Bob for meeting. "I understand how busy you are, Bob. I appreciate your time," she said, fixing him with an intense gaze. "No problem, Vicky," Bob replied. "Though I must confess, meeting you here without Sharon feels a tad uncomfortable. I prefer dining with my spouse, but since it concerns Sharon, I'm all ears. I presume you're planning a surprise for her birthday next month." Bob didn't anticipate the sadness in Vicky's eyes at the mention of their lunch or Sharon's birthday. "What's wrong, Bob? I know you and Sharon deeply love each other. I've witnessed enough to recognize your bond. That's why I'm here." It might strain our friendship, but if it helps salvage your marriage, I'm committed. There's no easy way to put this, but Sharon has been seeing someone for 2 months now, Vicky revealed. Bob was stunned. This has to be a joke. A really bad one, he expressed to Vicky. I'm very sorry, Bob, but it's not a joke. About 3 months ago, after you took on this project you're working on, Sharon became depressed. She's been irritable at work, and when we go out, she seems even more bored than usual. After a few martinis, we managed to get her to open up about missing you and feeling abandoned. She also mentioned feeling like you two were just a middle-aged married couple, letting life pass you by. Just then, the waiter came to take Vicky's order. She opted for a Cobb salad and lemon iced tea. Bob's mind was still racing with thoughts of his wife being secretive. In their 8 years together, Bob was confident his wife would confide in him if she felt unhappy. He believed they were always honest about their feelings, even when they disagreed. He turned to Vicky and urgently whispered, "Did she sleep with him?" "No, at least not as far as I know. And based on what I know of her, your wife is usually pretty open. That's why I'm surprised by her behavior," Vicky responded. "Bob, you should know something. Every woman I've talked to says the same thing. I imagine you both often complain about being overwhelmed by everyday life, or something along those lines," Vicky continued. "When Sharon brought it up, we all sympathized with her and told her the same thing, that she's a handsome woman and you should pay more attention to her. Unfortunately, my sister was there that night." "What does your sister have to do with this?" Bob asked, managing to suppress some anger. "Honestly, my sister is promiscuous," Vicky replied. The waiter who brought her tea raised an eyebrow at her comment. Vicky took a sip and went on. "My parents were both cheaters. I don't know who cheated first, but they always wanted revenge on each other. When I was 17, I asked them why they were still together, and they acted like I was from another planet. They said they loved each other and that's all that mattered. This affected my sister and me differently. I realized cheating ruins relationships. But my sister thought it was okay as long as you love each other. I love her, but she's misguided. Anyway, back to the point. My sister Gary suggested that if she doesn't find romance at home, she should seek it elsewhere. I told her she was wrong, but then Hannah and Gail started discussing finding better partners and keeping things secret. I think for them it was purely academic, especially since they're not married. Sharon said she'd never cheat on you, but I think my sister's words planted doubts in her mind." "Why do you think that?" asked Bob. Now uncertain about Sharon's fidelity, he began to process more information. None of this was easy to hear, but Bob always believed that knowledge was power. The following week, Luke Jonas and his team joined them at the Red Horse Bar. Sharon claims she didn't invite him, but she mentioned our group dance plans to him. It's usually fun when more people try something new, but not with Luke around. Now armed with a name, Bob acknowledged, "Knowledge is power." "Tell me about that guy, Luke," Bob demanded. Vicky noted Bob's assertive tone with a slight smile and proceeded, "Luke Jonas is notorious for chasing women. He pursues every woman, showing interest in anyone who falls sufferer to his charm. He doesn't mind if she's married or not, or particularly attractive. He simply enjoys the chase. Your wife caught his eye from the start, but until that night, he hadn't pursued her. Now he's after her, and instead of standing up to him, she's avoiding him. It's common knowledge that if Luke faces another lovemaking molestation charge, he's fired. She could halt his advances, but she doesn't. They've been frequently seen chatting in the cafeteria for the past few months. I attempted to discuss it with her, but she became defensive, insisting they're only friends and that Luke listens to her and understands her problems. I questioned her if she'd act the same way if you were present, and she blushed, admitting she wouldn't. Then she became upset, mentioning something about you not noticing her. After that, I backed off and kept an eye on her. They appeared to settle down at work, and I thought everything was back to normal until that incident 3 weeks ago. As Vicky's order arrived, she began to eat. Bob, observing his reaction, sipped his lemonade, his mind elsewhere. He wondered how she could think he'd be upset about her flirting with another man. He knew he wasn't overly jealous simply because he loved and trusted his wife. As for not noticing her, he pondered if he had become too absorbed in his work project. There's a significant reward waiting for him in the end, but perhaps he's pushed too hard. Curiosity about the incident 3 weeks ago nagged at him. Did he really want to know? For the next 5 minutes, they ate in silence as Bob processed Vicky's revelations. Undoubtedly, he was angry. She had no justification for being so close with another man, yet he could almost understand her logic. If he had been more attentive, perhaps none of this would have happened. And by not informing him of her flirtatious behavior, she was essentially lying to him. Of course, it was a lie of omission, but for now, he could overlook her actions and focus on fixing the situation. He would speak to her and share his concerns. If she's honest and agrees to distance herself from Luke, they can move forward. So far, he hadn't seen any lasting damage, unless, of course, something significant occurred within the last 3 weeks. "Tell me what happened 3 weeks ago. How bad was it?" he asked. With this inquiry, he found some solid mental ground beneath him. He felt he could handle it. Vicky looked at him sympathetically. "This is where it gets ugly, Bob. 3 weeks ago, we found ourselves back at the Red Horse Bar to dance. Luke and his friends arrived, and we all danced together, having a good time. Sharon had been drinking more than usual, with Luke purchasing drinks for her all evening, causing her to become quite intoxicated. I accompanied her to the restroom and realized she was even more inebriated than I had initially thought. Upon exiting, she held underwear in her hand, explaining that she wanted to feel liberated. Well, she was nearly drunk. I attributed her behavior to the drink and assisted her back to our table. I began attempting to persuade Hannah and Gail to help me take Sharon to my house so she wouldn't return home overly intoxicated. However, I noticed Sharon and Luke getting too close, bumping into each other and simulating lovemaking acts on the dance floor. After the group dancing ended, the rest of the evening felt like background noise. I witnessed Sharon placing the underwear in Luke's pocket at the end of a song, unfortunately witnessed by everyone else in the bar. Whistles echoed throughout the bar as Luke grinned widely and proceeded to give her a deep kiss. One of his friends recorded the scene on a mobile phone. I had hoped Sharon would resist, but she went along with it. When she noticed Bob's reaction, she apologized, saying she was sorry. His jaw literally dropped open, and he had to leave. He stuttered as he stood up and walked away, locking himself inside the bathroom, excusing himself for just a second. As he splashed water on his face and gripped the sink tightly, he recalled the night Sharon arrived home late, around 2:30 a.m., after Vicky called to say she'd be staying with her due to excessive drinking. This had happened several times before, and Bob was always grateful that Vicky and the girls ensured Sharon didn't receive a DUI citation. He remembered the passionate lovemaking they shared that night, sensing something different in her behavior. Returning to the present, he was overcome with rage, feeling betrayed by her arousal for another man and seemingly prepared for a confrontation upon returning home. "Damn," he thought. "What if she was thinking about him while we were together?" After composing himself, he returned to the table, noticing the sympathy on Vicky's face but unsure how to respond. His sandwich remained untouched as he asked Vicky for more information. "Honestly, Bob, that's about it," she replied. "The recent bachelorette parties were held at Hannah's house with wine and a lingerie show at work. Sharon seems distant with Luke, although he continues to pursue her. I thought it was over, but just yesterday I saw them talking. They stopped when I approached, so I'm not sure what's going on. I felt you needed to know, as she no longer listens to her friends," Vicky explained. As the waiter brought the bill, Bob quickly grabbed it and searched for his credit card. "I'd like to observe their interaction and perhaps intimidate them right off the bat," he suggested. Sharon proposed, "You ladies are going to the Red Horse Bar this week, so this Thursday when you go there, I'll show up and monitor them from the sidelines." He abruptly paused, noticing the apprehensive expression on Vicky's face. "What did I say wrong?" he inquired of Bob. "Hannah has a doctor's appointment early Friday morning, and Gail is visiting her brother in Florida. If Sharon goes out on Thursday, it won't be with us," Vicky explained, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. "I'm so sorry, darling," she expressed sorrowfully. "I know it's better not to ask if you're okay. But here's my home phone number. Call any time to talk to Ron or me." Her husband was a marriage counselor, so conversing with him might prove beneficial. "Thank you for informing me, Vicky. I understand this must be challenging for you, but I genuinely believe you're a good person and a good friend. I'm uncertain of what lies ahead, but I'm aware of the present circumstances, and I can take some measures. Thanks again." Bob expressed his gratitude, rose from the table, settled the credit card bill, and departed on Wednesday. Today marked a breakthrough in the project Bob was engaged in. They managed to secure a supply of finished parts from a startup company in Harrisburg, reducing setup time by 2 months, ensuring at least a week's supply despite unstable transport logistics. With 2 more phone calls, this plan would be completed 2 months ahead of schedule, saving millions for the military. The cash bonus would also be substantial, as Bob anticipated, and the project's recognition would significantly elevate his reputation. He should have been as content as a cat with a belly full of sour cream. Instead, He pondered how much he dreaded returning home and facing what he felt he should address. He resolved to investigate the matter himself. While he lacked access to her work email, he doubted they communicated through it given HR's control. He logged into her Yahoo email account but found nothing incriminating. However, she could have a separate account, which he wouldn't know until accessing their home computer. Bob acknowledged his lack of tech savvy, realizing that buying security cameras or installing voice-activated microphones sounded appealing in theory, but he already had a counterplan in mind. He simply aimed to gather as much information as possible to gauge the extent of effort required to salvage or terminate his marriage. Sharon had already taken their daughter Casey away from his parents and manipulated him into delivering Chinese food. When he asked what she wanted, she responded by saying that, after 10 years together and 8 of them married, he should know by now that she loves him. He couldn't resist being sarcastic in his response, mentioning that he just wanted to ensure she's still content with the arrangement. His phone rang immediately after. She then requested an extra roll, mentioning shakto. Had it not been for yesterday's bombshell, he would have been elated to arrive home an hour earlier and spend time with his wife and child. However, glancing at the clock, he realized that before the project began, this hour would have been 2 hours later. He also recognized that he hadn't been home with his family this early on a Friday since the project started. Coupled with fatigue and stress, it was evident how Sharon might feel neglected, yet that didn't justify her actions. As he entered through the front door, he caught sight of his wife reaching for a bottle of wine. He paused, simply admiring her figure. At 31, she epitomized the prime of womanhood. Standing at 5 feet tall, she boasted curves that were undeniably enticing. Even in loose sweatpants, her shapely rear was evident. With her hair tied back in a ponytail, she turned around, flashing him a radiant smile, prompting him to reflect on how incredibly fortunate he was to have her. Then, reality hit him. "I'm so happy you're home, honey. How was work?" She approached him, planting a kiss on his lips. "Pretty good. We've made a major breakthrough on some supplies, so we might finish the project at least a month ahead of schedule. Sweetheart, I know I've been away from home a lot due to this project. It sucks that I can't share the details because it's classified. But I want you to know that you and Casey are my top priority, and I'll do everything to keep us safe," he assured her, gazing into her eyes. Did he detect a hint of remorse or guilt? Or was he just imagining things? It was one of those moments when he cursed his inability to read people. Often labeled as straightforward, he preferred direct communication and expected the same from others. While he knew his approach might initially seem blunt, people appreciated his honesty and no-nonsense attitude. This method had served him well for 34 years, and he saw little reason to change it, until now. "Aw, darling," she responded. "We both adore you and understand. I do wish there were more of you around, but I know this is temporary. Still, I'm glad you acknowledge it." She seemed on the verge of tears. Was she genuinely emotional or just a skilled actress? "So, what does the project's early completion mean for you?" she inquired, unpacking food containers from her bag. "Well, firstly, it means a substantial bonus to my salary. The exact amount remains unknown until the project is approved, but it's not insignificant. Moreover, successfully completing our first government project should attract more work to the company. As the project leader, there may be lucrative opportunities with government contractors seeking my expertise. The higher-ups are aware of this, so I might negotiate some additional perks. If all goes smoothly, it should be quite rewarding," he explained, attempting to eat his sweet and sour pork with chopsticks before opting for a fork. "Didn't I mention this before?" he queried between bites. "Not that I recall, darling," she replied. "All I remember is you mentioning a significant contract you couldn't discuss, but it sounded promising." "And since then, it seems like we haven't had much conversation," she remarked, appearing a bit downcast before perking up. "But it looks like my husband will be back soon," she added with a brighter tone. He glanced at her. "Time to go fishing. So, what bar are you ladies heading to tomorrow night? Should I swing by after work to ensure you're all okay to drive home?" he asked, aiming for a casual tone. "Oh, actually, we decided to go to the Red Horse Bar for some group dancing, but I think we'll be done before you finish work," she replied, her gaze shifting to her orange chicken. His heart sank. At that moment, Casey finished her egg roll and requested bedtime stories. He cleared his plate and rinsed it in the sink before lifting his daughter and carrying her into the living room. For the next hour, he indulged his child by reading story after story until she drifted off to sleep. A soft snore emanated from the sofa where he spotted his wife curled up with her book abandoned in her lap. Picking up his daughter, he ascended the stairs to her bedroom, laying her gently in bed and tucking her in snugly beneath the covers. As he contemplated the forthcoming day, tears welled in his eyes. He longed for his daughter to remember these pleasant evenings with her parents, rather than the looming hardships ahead. Wiping away his tears, he descended the stairs to where his wife slept on the sofa. He pressed a tender kiss to her lips and pulled the blanket over her to shield her from the chill. Then he set out to find her phone, discovering it plugged into a wall socket on the nightstand in their bedroom. Unlocking it with a swipe, he began scrolling through her text messages. It didn't take long to find what he was seeking. Scrolling back, he traced their exchanges over the past 3 months. Him. Hey, beautiful. It was fun watching you and the girls dance last night. Her. Likewise. Bob works late on Thursdays and the in-laws watch Casey, so we had a girls' night. Him. Your husband seems like a good guy, letting you have some fun. Her. Yes, he's amazing. The messages remained benign for the next few weeks until this particular exchange. Her. Vicky gave me a talking to today about our lunch breaks. I was annoyed, but she picked up on everything. Him. Exactly. I don't want any misunderstandings. Her. She asked if Bob would approve of how we've been acting, which got me thinking we might be giving off the wrong signals. Plus, I shouldn't be confiding all my issues to another guy. I'll try talking to Bob. Him. I understand. But if you can't get his attention, you know where to find me. I'll even treat you to dinner if need be. Just as friends. Bob couldn't recall her attempting to discuss anything with him, but it might have been when he discovered the necessity for food-grade stainless steel for the project. He dedicated several days to sourcing a supplier capable of meeting the required quantity. Throughout this period, he could have been oblivious even if a bomb had been dropped on him. Until now. Reviewing her messages, all seemed innocuous. He felt it glaringly obvious that the idiot was making advances toward her. How could she not see it? Scrolling down, he encountered the next batch of messages. Her. You have to return them today. Him. What are you referring to? Her. You know very well my friends are furious with me right now and I don't blame them. If Bob finds out I behaved like some sort of fancy woman, he might leave me. Him. So you don't want me to show him the video? Her. What video? No one at work can see this. Him. Sam was there and he captured a video on his phone. I'll ensure he deletes it, but you owe me. Her. Okay, I can't lose Bob. Not after last night. Him. What happened last night? Her. It's really none of your business. Him. Was he upset that you came home late and intoxicated? Her. Very funny. Hell, no. Let's just say something happened that turned everything upside down and leave it at that. Him. So, some dirty dancing with me made you toil for your husband's forgiveness? He should be thankful to me. Her. You're despicable. Last night was unforgettable, and it was because Bob and I love each other. Now give me back my underwear and ensure that damn video is erased. Her. Damn. It sounded like I was some sort of fancy woman. Bob deserves better than me. Him. No, he's fortunate to have you. He was keeping an eye on you, wasn't he? I'm sure he's a great guy, but you often go out alone. Her. I don't need anyone to watch over me. Just be the friend you claim to be and handle what I've asked. Please. Him. Sorry. Of course, I'll assist you, and afterward, I'll let you treat me to dinner. Her. Just ensure no one sees this video, and I'll do whatever you want. Nothing further until last Monday. Him. I heard the bachelorette party is canceled. How about dinner with me? Her. Not a good idea. Sorry. Him. Come on. Your husband will be at work, and the girls left you alone one evening with a friend, and we can chat like we used to in the cafeteria. Besides, you owe me. Her. Okay. I'll meet you at the Red Horse at 8. Him. No. Meet me at TGIF located at the Sheraton Hotel. They have great drinks, and I don't want to be bothered by drunk idiots. If we drink too much, I'll get a room. Her. Okay, but it's just dinner with a couple of friends, and I'm grateful to you for ensuring the video never surfaced. It's bad enough that people at work have heard about this. Him. Don't worry about it. I saw Sam delete the video, and soon someone else will do something scandalous, and you'll be fine. See you at 8. That's when it hit him. This was likely the end of his marriage. How often had he witnessed his wife going out for a date with another man at a hotel restaurant bar? How could this end well? How could she not think closeness was involved? Closing the messages, he reconnected his phone to the charger, undressed, and slipped into bed alone. Sleep eluded him for a long while. On Thursday, she descended the stairs wearing her little black dress, the one she always donned when they went out together. She looked stunning. Pausing at the bottom of the stairs, she spotted him seated at the table. I didn't expect you to come home so early today, baby, she said, her tone faltering slightly. We need to talk, Sharon, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. This is perhaps the most crucial conversation we'll ever have. Please, take a seat. She sat down, looking apprehensive, and reached out for his hand as usual, but he withdrew it. I know there won't be a bachelorette party today. I know you're seeing Luke Jonas. Behind my back, he began. Bob, please let me explain. But he abruptly interrupted, slamming his fist on the table. Damn it, Sharon! Listen to me! He shouted. You can't speak until I've said my piece! She recoiled, tears welling in her eyes. He regarded her impassively and continued. As I said, I know you kissed that idiot at lunch. I know you danced with him at the Red Horse Bar. I know you took off your underwear and gave them to him after some provocative moves on the dance floor. I know the only reason you were all over me 3 weeks ago was because you were excited about him. I also know that tonight you're going on a date with him to a restaurant in the hotel where your boyfriend has already made a reservation. I just don't know if you've already slept with him, and I don't know what could stop you if you haven't. He paused, trying to rein in his anger. Sharon, you lied to me by omission about Luke. You lied to me about your risque dance. And you lied to me about going out with the girls. Frankly, I'm exhausted, and my trust in you is shattered. I'm not even sure if I want to salvage this marriage, yet your actions suggest that you're no longer invested in it. Therefore, I present you with 3 options. He raised a finger. Option 1, you walk out that door and go to your idiot of a boyfriend. Even if you don't sleep together tonight, this choice will end our marriage. There's no chance I'll want to salvage it. He raised a second finger. Option 2, we sit here all night and you try to persuade me to work on saving our marriage. It'll be incredibly challenging for you to convince me, as I'm not inclined to believe a single word from your mouth. However, maybe you'll succeed because I truly love you, and we have a child to consider. I can tell you there's a 50% chance I'll be willing to try. He raised a third finger. Option 3, you take me with you tonight to confront your lover in front of me. You demand that he never speaks to or contacts you again. Then you allow us to speak to him privately for at least 15 minutes, out of earshot. This option will earn you the most respect and will maximize my willingness to work with you. If you didn't sleep with him or engage in any lovemaking activity, I promise I'll be 100% committed to making this relationship work. However, if you did, this is the only option that could potentially salvage our marriage. She appeared on the verge of vomiting, gazing at him with what could only be described as horror. Option 1, 2, or 3, Sharon. Which will you choose? The question lingered in the air for nearly a minute. She seemed to be restraining herself from being sick as she looked at me. Bob, I'm so sorry about everything, and I desperately need to talk to you. In response to your question, who will lead, you or me? Well, that was unexpected. I really didn't anticipate her opting for our meeting with her lover. I had thought it was almost certain she would sit here all night attempting to justify her behavior. Agreeing to arrange the meeting with her idiot actually earned her some points, but she was still deep in the red. I took the keys and followed her to the car. Out of habit, I opened the door for her, and she nearly broke down in tears as I pulled out onto the road. She glanced at me. I really ruined everything for us, didn't I? She asked quietly. Yes, Sharon, you really did, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. What can I do to fix this? She asked. I pondered for a moment. I had a couple of scenarios in mind. Well, first and foremost, complete honesty from now on. I shouldn't even have to say this, but evidently you think it's acceptable to omit things I should know or to lie to me repeatedly. Along with this, you need to find a way to make me believe what you say. I'm not sure how you plan to do this, but frankly, I wasn't the one who broke our trust. Another thing I didn't think needed to be mentioned, but I'll say it anyway. He's dead to you. If we stay together, you won't talk to him at work. You won't inquire about his day. If he shows up at the bar you're at, you leave. If you can't leave, call me immediately. You don't accept drinks or gifts from him. Regardless of what he says, you cut off all communication with him. Next, when we return tonight, you'll tell me everything. I don't want to hear your thoughts. I understand I was consumed by this project, so I'll take some responsibility. If you harbor any resentment toward me, let me know. And lastly, for now, schedule marriage counseling. If you prefer to choose a counselor yourself, feel free to do so. Maybe Ron can recommend someone. When I finished speaking, her phone chimed with a message. She glanced down and paled even further. It's him wondering where I am, she murmured quietly. I reached out and she handed me the phone. Without a word, I scrolled through her text messages. There were a couple from earlier today. Him. Hey, I booked a room with a jacuzzi. Maybe we can relax after lunch. Bring your bikini. Her. You can't get me drunk enough to take a hot bath with you. I won't bring the bikini. Him. We'll see. You know what happens when you drink. Maybe you won't need a bikini. And then just now, him. Where are you? While waiting for you, I had a glass of wine. I replied, I'm running a little late. I have a surprise for you. Him. Oh, you brought your bikini. Perfect. I returned the phone to my wife. She read the messages and simply hung her head. You know these messages don't help your case, right? Just the ones from today make it seem like you're planning to hook up with him tonight. How much worse will it look if I scroll further? I asked, knowing full well how damning it would appear. I suppose I should ask, I began. Do you consider your text messages today as inappropriate flirting? Can you grasp how these exchanges have shattered all my trust in you? I heard her sobbing. Bob, I swear, I only intended to have dinner tonight. I never planned to sleep with him. I couldn't help but regard her as if she were foolish. Were you intending to give him your underwear after taking them off, like you did a few weeks ago? I didn't think she could grow any paler, but I was proven wrong. Sharon, we're almost there. You might want to fix your makeup and think about what you're going to say to Luke. Oh, and avoid drinking wine. She pulled down the visor and retrieved a napkin from the glove compartment. As she began to compose herself and stop crying, she started applying mascara. In a more composed tone, she asked, Bob, I understand why you think Luke was toying with me. Listening to you talk about it, I think it's true. But Bob, how could I have not seen this? I know my recent decisions don't reflect it, but I'm not a naive little girl. I've fended off more attractive and sophisticated men than Luke. So why did he target me? This is one of the reasons why I find it hard to believe what you say now. Sharon, you're a beautiful, intelligent woman who should see through this nonsense. That's why I have to wonder. Did you go along with it willingly? I responded. Imagine if I picked up some woman at a bar with this guy and lied to you that I was going to dinner with her tonight. No wonder you're so angry and hurt. Her color seemed to be returning, and her voice grew slightly firmer. Okay, I messed up and now I have to find a way to fix it. Thank you for giving me a chance. She leaned in to kiss me, but at the last moment I turned my head, allowing her to peck me on the cheek. I'm not over this. Not in the long run, I said. She looked at me, almost shocked. We usually show a lot of affection. Hopefully we can get back to that. What should I tell him? She asked as we pulled into the restaurant parking lot. Finding a spot, I turned off the engine and let my anger simmer. What do I want you to tell him, Sharon? Our relationship is barely hanging on because of your actions with that idiot. You two have shattered the core of our marriage. Our daughter could spend Thanksgiving with you and Christmas with me. I want to make this clear, so tell him whatever you want. She sat quietly for a moment, then sighed and opened the car door. As we approached the restaurant in the hotel, she took a step as if reaching for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't welcome her touch either. We entered, and a pretty red-haired girl stood behind the small kiosk, asking if we were a party of two. Before I could respond, my wife interjected, stating that we were meeting someone there who was already present. The head waitress acknowledged her statement and suggested we take a look around. Not knowing what the person looked like, I relied on my wife to guide us. She lightly nudged me with her elbow and gestured towards the back of the restaurant where a man sat near the hotel door, seemingly engrossed in his phone. With determined steps, she walked towards the table and stopped without bothering to sit down. The man looked up, spotted her, and flashed a wide smile. It took him a moment to realize there was a man behind her. When he noticed me, his smile vanished, and his eyes narrowed slightly. Luke, this is my husband, Robert Morgan. He's concerned about our relationship, and after talking with him, I have to agree. For the first time in our marriage, I've given him reason to doubt my fidelity. I'll work hard to repair the breach of trust caused by my relationship with you. From now on, I want nothing to do with you. There's no reason for you to call, text, or otherwise communicate with me. I accept responsibility for getting our relationship to this point. Now, I've chosen to end it. My husband is aware of my regrettable actions at the Red Horse Bar. I'll do everything I can to salvage my relationship with him, including informing HR of the entire situation. Tomorrow, I'll let them know that any attempt to engage me in non-work-related conversation will be unwelcome. Now, I'll sit at the bar while my husband talks to you. As she turned away, she kissed me before I could react. She looked into my eyes for a moment and whispered, I'm truly sorry. I couldn't help but glance at her as she walked up to the bar. Everything turned out even better than I had anticipated. Slipping into the seat opposite the embarrassed playboy, I couldn't resist sizing him up. Dark hair, slender build, impeccably dressed. He might be considered attractive, but I've never been good at judging men. He was probably around my height, although it was hard to tell while he was seated. I couldn't help but notice his lingering gaze on the glass of wine on the table across from him. That almost confirmed my suspicions. It's time to keep my cool. I roughly knew what I wanted, but I had to figure things out as I went along. Quick thinking wasn't my strong suit. "So you thought it'd be a surprise to find her in a bikini?" I said with a half smile. "Do you really believe she told you everything?" He responded with a grin. Now that this fool was in front of me, I felt composed. This was a problem I could handle. "Actually, yes. I've known this woman for 10 years, and I've been married to her for 8. I believe I understand her better than some cute guy who's been pursuing her for 3 months. I maintained a smile. The waiter approached and asked for my drink order. I requested a double Johnny Walker Black with ice. "She certainly knows how to please a man," he remarked, still attempting to grin. He glanced at the glass of wine he had already ordered for her. "Yes, that's true this time." I grinned broadly at him. "But I don't think you're speaking from experience. Need photographs?" He joked, laughing. This guy was trying to provoke me. I felt the urge to reach across the counter, but instead, I laughed. "You don't have photographs. If she had gone that far with you, you wouldn't need to slip something in her drink. What are wannabe rapists using these days? Gamma-hydroxybutyrate, Rohypnol, or just good old ecstasy?" It was a guess, but his shocked expression dispelled any doubts. He flinched as I leaned across the table towards him. Now, I was genuinely furious. "You despicable coward! I should thrash you right here and now, but I'm not sure I won't end up eliminating you. I don't want to end up in jail at this moment. I gave my wife 3 options, and now I'm giving you 3 options." I jabbed my finger under his nose. "First, you're leaving. Right now, you'll go and apologize to my wife, and tomorrow you'll resign from your job. I promise not to pursue you. Then, you'll leave the city." I raised another finger. "Second, you go to the police and confess to medicating my wife's drink. Serve your sentence and stay away from my wife. I'll keep an eye on you, but I won't come after you. Then, you'll leave the city." I raised a third finger. "Third, I signed both of us up for boxing classes in 4 weeks. You and I will step into the ring, sign injury waivers, and neither of us will leave until we pass out. And when you wake up, you still leave my wife alone. Then, you'll leave the city." The waiter brought my scotch just as I finished. I took a long sip and felt the burn. It was time to regain composure. "You must think I'm a fool. Why would I agree to any of these options?" He smirked. I gave him what I hoped was a menacing grin. "Because you don't want to spend the rest of your pathetic life looking over your shoulder. Every time you walk to your car at night, you'll wonder if I or one of my friends is lurking, ready to break your legs and crush your manhood with a baseball bat. Every time you answer the door, you won't know if I or one of my pals will barge in, tie you up, and castrate you. Every time you go to a bar, you'll worry if I or one of my buddies will spike your drink and subject you to unspeakable acts before maiming your manhood. You won't risk it. You're a coward, or so your wife claimed, after I had my way with her last night." His face regained color. I took another sip of whiskey, then reached into my pocket and activated the voice recorder on my phone. I hoped he would document our conversation. I really should have planned this evening better. "You were planning to medicate me wife and assault her, you pervert. Are you willing to gamble a lifetime of agony on me not following through?" It was time to reel him in. The medicaties were just to get her in the mood for when my friends arrived. We were planning to have our way with her tonight. My composure vanished altogether. I managed to grab him by the collar with my left hand and pull him towards me. Unable to slap too hard with my right hand due to being seated, I heard a satisfying crunch and felt his nose give way. He yelled, holding his nose, threatening to call the cops. In response, I told him to go ahead, calling him a jackass, and expressing my desire for the authorities to medicate, test the remaining wine in my glass, and listen to the tape of him confessing. The police responded to the disturbance in 10 minutes. Apparently, 2 officers were having lunch at the nearby subway. They took my statement and collected the remaining wine and glass for analysis. They searched Luke and found a packet of white powder. He requested a lawyer and refused to speak further. They listened to my recording and confiscated my phone as evidence. It was a struggle, but you could hear Luke discussing medicates and a planned assault. It was nearly 4 in the morning before Sharon and I were allowed to leave the police station. After her statement, one of the officers spent almost 15 minutes praising me and emphasizing how I prevented her from being assaulted. By the end, she was utterly shattered. Luke remained in police custody. We used her phone to quickly inform my parents of everything. They understood and promised to take care of Casey, deciding to take her to the zoo. As we pulled into the garage and switched off the car, we exchanged glances. She released her seatbelt and enveloped me across the console in a tight hug. I allowed her to cry on my shoulder for about a minute before gently guiding her away. "Sharon, we still need to have a conversation, but it's late and we should get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll both go to work and spend the day together sorting things out. How does that plan sound to you?" "Yes, Bob. Getting into bed sounds wonderful," she responded softly, then added, "May I please sleep beside you?" "Of course, baby." The following morning, I woke up and snuggled closer to her. Reflecting on the events of the previous night, I dared to hope that everything might turn out all right. However, I knew we still had a few discussions ahead before making any decisions. My hand rested on her stomach, and she brought it up to her chest. I felt a surge of emotion, but knew I needed to slow things down. Sitting up in bed, I playfully smacked one of her flawless backside. "Get up. Let's take a walk." "I don't want to have a serious conversation on an empty stomach," I suggested. Eventually, we ended up showering together, which did little more than expedite our morning routine. Despite the temptation, I wasn't ready to be in bed until we resolved our issues. We enjoyed breakfast at the International House of Pancakes, chatting about Casey and her upcoming fun time with my parents. We managed to keep the conversation light and upbeat. After finishing our last cup of coffee, we settled the bill and returned home, sitting down at the kitchen table to face each other. "Okay, I think I'll start," I began. "You can see for yourself what kind of person Luke is, so I won't dwell on that. He claimed you satisfied him and called me a teddy bear after sleeping with him a few days ago. Is that true?" "No. The worst encounter I had with him was that awful night at the Red Horse. I understand the gravity of my actions, but I never went further," she replied. "How can I believe you? You lied about going on a date with him last night, and you lied and omitted details about that bar incident. Not to mention your entire relationship with him," I expressed, feeling it was time to be transparent. "I've been pondering this, and I think I have a suggestion," I continued. "What about a polygraph test?" she asked. "Do you mean a lie detector test?" I clarified. She nodded. "Yes, Schedule 1. Ask me anything you want. Just let me know the time and place." Her genuine expression was striking. "I understand these tests aren't foolproof, but I'd feel much better if you went ahead and told the truth." "I'll see what I can arrange. It might take some time to set up, but it's worth considering," I responded. "Actually, it might take longer than expected," I added. She smiled. "That's a good starting point. We can revisit the extent of your involvement later. But my next question will likely be the toughest. It's what hurts me the most and has the biggest impact on our relationship. How do we move forward? The incident with the underwear embarrassed you, and I get that. I don't like it, but I understand. It's hard for me to deal with the fact that you got close to another guy without telling me. But if you thought it was just a platonic friendship, I can understand. What I can't understand, and what makes me want to walk away before I get hurt again, is when you said you were seeing other girls when you were actually meeting him for dinner. A blatant lie, disregarding the consequences. But it broke my heart when you said you were dating other people. I know there were tears in my eyes, but I felt powerless." "Bob, all I can do is explain what I was thinking at the time. First, I want to say how sorry I am for lying to you about everything. When you took on that project for the first time since we've been together, I felt like I wasn't a priority. I'm not blaming you or your work. I understand why you took it on and how important it was to you. I'm just expressing how I felt. I started feeling down, and then my sister Vicky said something that stuck with me. She suggested finding romance elsewhere. I never saw it as cheating on you. I realized that while you were busy with the project, I might find what I needed elsewhere. And then Luke came along. I didn't fully realize it, but he made me feel special. He asked about my day, my family, my interests. Our conversations were mostly about me. She sighed, watching my reaction, which I tried to conceal. When Vicky confronted me at lunch, I realized what I was doing. I was using Luke to fulfill what I felt I couldn't get from you. But I still wanted to work things out with you. The night things got out of hand. I didn't invite him or his friends. They showed up before my other friends did. Luke bought drinks, including for me. I ended up more intoxicated than I've ever been with you. I've made some terrible mistakes that you know about, but then we had incredible night, which confused me even more. How could I act so promiscuously with him but then have such wonderful moments with you?" She stood up to pour herself some water, drinking half before continuing. "Then the video surfaced. I knew you'd be furious, rightfully so. If you got drunk and kissed another woman, I'd be furious too. And I knew it would be worse, because after our passionate encounter, you'd wonder if I was thinking of someone else. So I made another mistake. I tried to involve Luke to cover it up. Perhaps he encouraged it, then made sure I knew. I felt obligated to help him out, and he wanted to take me to dinner when my friends couldn't. I was lonely, thinking you wouldn't be home until late. In a moment of weakness, I made a terrible choice, and I'm truly sorry. Our relationship has always been built on trust, and I broke it." Tears streamed down her face, though she didn't sob. "Oh my God," I said, standing to embrace her. I kissed her tenderly, then pulled back. "We're not there yet, and it'll take time. But if you're fully committed, so am I." Sharon and I attended counseling for some time. Discussing my issues helped me overcome them. The significant outcome for me was that, given communication has been a strength since our first encounter, we continue to work on it. Additionally, the counselor recommended Sharon undergo testing for hormonal imbalances. At 31, it seemed premature to worry about this, but it proved to be worthwhile. Following several tests and a switch in birth control pills, she experienced improvement. Though we're not entirely back to where we were, we're in a good place again. The polygraph test confirmed her honesty in all the challenging questions I posed. While there's still a lingering doubt about the accuracy of these tests in my mind, I can accept it. I decided to enroll in boxing lessons, while Sharon became intrigued by the self-defense classes offered there. Thursday nights for her turned into self-defense evenings. Sharon suggested we join martial arts classes where she excels, and I struggle to keep up. Sparring has become our favorite form of foreplay. The project was completed 6 weeks ahead of schedule and under budget. My company now competes with major players in government contracts. Although they wanted to promote me to vice president, I declined due to excessive travel requirements. Instead, I established the Special Projects Department and lead it now. This came with a new office and a secretary assistant. My new assistant has a stunning figure and a dazzling smile, and she fulfills my needs perfectly. Thus far, there haven't been any complaints about my wife and me working together. As long as we bring in revenue, I doubt anyone will raise objections. Most of the $38,000 ASAWI bonus from my initial project went towards Casey's college fund. However, I had saved enough for a week-long, all-inclusive resort vacation with my wife. My parents are prepared to return my daughter when we get back. I received an assault charge for punching Luke. Despite this, it's the most fulfilling $300 and 40 hours of community service I've ever completed. Luke will serve 3 to 5 years for attempted maltreatment and possession of a controlled substance. The substance turned out to be gamma-hydroxybutyrate. Additionally, he was assaulted while walking to his car in the evening, but it wasn't by me. Evidently, one of his previous sufferer's brothers caught up with him. The assailant will serve 2 to 3 years for the attack. I deposit $50 monthly into his prison commissary account.